First up, I'm really grateful to Trishna Singh, founder and director of Sikh Sanjog, and her colleague Jasbir Singh from Sikh Sanjog, Edinburgh, and also to Mrs. Kamaljeet Sevadar, the Central Gurdwara Singh Sabha, Glasgow, for supporting and co-hosting this fantastic event with us. Also, many thanks as always to our brilliant funders, Scottish Government. You'll hear more from all of them and our other brilliant speakers shortly. You'll also have opportunities at the very end of the programme, after all the talks have taken place, to ask questions of any of our esteemed speakers. Just to say that this webinar is being recorded so that we can share with many more people afterwards. There are also 3 questions in the chat bar, which would be really grateful if you could answer, as it would provide us with great feedback and help us with future webinars. Thank you. Finally, you may wonder why we as a kidney charity are so involved in a subject about organ donation. Well, it's because, and you may not know this, but the vast majority of people waiting for an organ transplant are waiting for a kidney. As a research charity, we are focusing on research to make transplanted organs last longer and better. For more information, please visit our website. So without further ado, I'd like to now invite the speakers. First up is my colleague Bushra Riaz, who is the coordinator for volunteers for Kidney Research UK's organ donation project in Scotland. She is a graduate in management and maths and holds an MSc in marketing. Having worked full-time within the marketing field for several years, she took some time out after her 3rd child. She initially became a valued volunteer in Glasgow for our charity, and then I recruited her on a part-time basis as the coordinator of the volunteers known as Peer Educators. She joined the project some 3.5 years ago, I think it's been now, and has been a real asset ever since. Thanks, Bushra. Over to you.
Okay, so if you just let me, right. Okay, so thanks very much for the introduction, Narjeen. So my name is Bushra Riaz, and I will be today talking to you about our South Asian Organ Donation Project. I'm a Scottish Peer Educator Project Coordinator for the project. So who are Kidney Research? We are the leading charity committed to developing treatments, patient information, and raising vital public awareness to help save lives. Every year, an estimated 60,000 people with kidney failure are alive today because of the advances in research that we have directly contributed to. With our research breakthrough, more kidney patients have a chance to have a normal life. We have a lot of further things that the charity are involved in, such as research and fundraising. And currently we have a new online service called Kidney Beam, which focuses on kidney patients. Especially in the time of COVID, everything is online. It's a free online service that you can log on to at any time at your own and learn about things like self-awareness, yoga classes. So please do visit our website to learn more. So what is kidney disease? I'm sure Dr. Singh will be talking more in detail about kidney disease. So just a short summary. It is a silent killer. There are 3 million people in the UK with it right now, and there is no cure. Kidney failure is 5 times more common in people from the BAME communities. That's the Black, Asian and minority ethnic. And Asian people with diabetes are 10 times more likely to have kidney failure than those with diabetes from the white community. And the 2 major causes being diabetes and high blood pressure. So what was the need of our project? The BAME communities represent 14% of the UK population. And South Asians, that's the Sikh, Hindu and Muslim community, they represent 7.5% of the UK population. We found that the registration on the NHS ODR, that's the Organ Donor Register, from the BAME communities was very low. And many of them are unaware of health issues such as diabetes and having high blood pressure, which is very common in the South Asian communities, which leads to kidney failure and then the importance of organ donation. We are more likely to need a transplant, but less likely to donate and more likely to wait longer for a donation. There's lots of misinformation in terms of operation guidelines, myths of mutilations and misconceptions. There's lots of cultural misconceptions and religious, and we found that there was a lack of knowledge. And due to the language barriers, it was very difficult to communicate between, and there was no link corridor between the doctors and the community. So the Scottish Peer Educator Project started in 2013. We are now currently into our 7th year and now going into our 8th year. The project focuses on the South Asian communities, that's the Hindu, Sikh and Muslim communities, and educating them about kidney disease and health, and also raising awareness about the change of law that's now going to take place on the 26th of March 2021. So the impact that the Peer Educator have had is we've engaged with over 6,000 people, and we've had about 1,000 sign-ups. This was pre-COVID times, and I'm sure the number has gone up. We've had one donor, can save up to 9 lives. That just shows you how many people that that one person can help. There's more awareness and discussion taking place. There's lots of inquiries and discussions, and the Scottish project is the most successful in the UK, having won many awards such as the SEMVO and the Scottish Asian Business Awards. These are just some of the pictures of the volunteers at events and at the award ceremonies. Thank you very much, and kidney disease ends here.
Thanks very much, Bushra. Right, okay, so that's a lovely little introduction to the work we do, for those of you who don't know. Yeah, I'm sure, like Bushra says, you know, we can't wait to sort of get out there again. So let's hope that social distancing will soon become a thing of the past and we can be out there in the communities. Okay, so next up, I would like to introduce you to Mrs. Swaran Chowdhury, otherwise known as Judy, who is one of our amazing peer educators. In fact, she, along with her husband, Mr. Surjit Singh Chowdhury, who's also on the webinar now, were the very first peer educators that are recruited onto our project back in 2014. Thanks to their guidance and support, we have developed the project to be, as Bushra said, the most successful in the UK. In a short space of time, in a short space of time, Judy went on to encourage other people from different communities to become volunteers. Out of hundreds of events, Judy has volunteered for probably all of them. Despite other charitable causes that she volunteers for, she always makes time for our organ donation project. She has undoubtedly managed to single-handedly increase the number of registrations onto the NHS organ donor register, which is well over 1,000. It's obvious that she's helped improve these figures, and bearing in mind that one donor can help to save the lives of up to 9 people, this is a really significant achievement. And this too, given the fact that Judy has no personal connection to kidney disease or organ donation. Judy's also volunteered her time over the last 4 years to help us at Kidney Research UK to develop our engagement with the public, and has served on the Lay Advisory Committee. One of my most memorable moments of Judy's many achievements came early in the project. As programme manager, I approached her to do a speech for an event at Holyrood, home of the Scottish Parliament. At first, Judy declined, but when reassured, she embraced the challenge, her first public speaking episode ever. And once she decided, she really put her heart and soul into it, practicing with me via voice recordings and WhatsApp calls while on holiday in Dubai, and even cut her holiday short to be at the Scottish Parliament event in time. Judy has been an exceptional asset to our life-saving project, and it wouldn't be the success without her. Therefore, I'm really extremely delighted and very proud on behalf of Kidney Research UK that our nomination resulted in a much-deserved British Empire Medal honour in this year's New Year's honours. Many congratulations, and over to you, Judy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I feel very honoured and humbled to receive this recognition. I share this award with the whole Kidney Research organization. We realize that education is key in helping people understand the importance of organ donation. Anyone in this country can contribute to this worthy cause when armed with the necessary knowledge. Here is some background about me. I'm from New Delhi in India. I moved to London in 1969 after marriage and stayed there for a few years, where I had bookkeeping position in various hotels. I also worked for Her Majesty's Custom and Excise as an assistance officer. I moved to Scotland with my family in 1973. I have 4 children and 3 girls and a boy. After moving to Scotland, I continued working, but this was also the start of my volunteering chapter through helping with school holiday clubs. My interest in voluntary work has grown ever since, and around 11 years ago, I started volunteering at the local hospice, the Prince and Princess of Wales. Later on, I began teaching yoga with modest class of 2, which has since grown to a class size of 18. In 2014, Nirja of Kidney Research UK contacted my husband in Glasgow, looking for local volunteers to help raise awareness. Knowing that this would be an interest close to my heart, I was so impressed by Nirja's commitment and enthusiasm toward the subject. I felt compelled to help and introduce new members to form a local volunteer team. My husband and I were the first peer educator in Scotland, and it's worth mentioning that we had no connection or no knowledge about kidney disease. We were given 2 days training where we learned about the kidney as an organ and desperate need for organ donors, including donors for heart, livers, lungs, and other organs. We are now approaching 7 years, and I have thoroughly enjoyed working with the team. I have been fortunate enough to educate and raise awareness in various settings, ranging from universities, community centers, hotels, schools, mosques, temples, gurdwaras, and festivals. In the picture displayed, you will see some of the events that we have attended to raise awareness of kidney disease and organ donation. I have also enjoyed taking part in events like Bridges Walk, Glasgow and Edinburgh Mela, and I spoke for the first time in the Parliament House in Edinburgh. So far, we have achieved over 1,000 signatures from organ donors. I can proudly say that as peer educators, we have contributed in the success which has led to awards such as the SEMBO and Scottish Asian Business Awards. An added bonus, I have made lifelong friends and have heard some fascinating stories. As a British Asian, the supply versus demand problem of kidney donors was a shocking revelation. Personally speaking, I have found working with communities really beneficial to building my own confidence, and it has given me the opportunity to give something back to the community that I love being a part of. South Asian communities contribute so much to society. However, organ donation was one area where we were behind, but are now catching up. I can say that I have found the whole experience rewarding, not only for our community, but equally for myself as an individual. I could not think of more worthy way of building one's own confidence. Finally, I would recommend anyone interested in volunteering to approach Kidney Research UK. It's an extremely fulfilling role where you can really make a difference and save lives. I will continue working along our team of amazing volunteers for as long as God allows me to. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Judy. That was lovely. And actually, those of you who don't know, although she's presented at Holyrood in Scotland, at the Scottish Parliament a number of years ago, this is the first time she's presented on Zoom. So if you join me to give her a round of applause. Thank you, Judy. That was lovely. And, you know, looking at all those pictures of us out and about at events and at those glitzy award ceremonies really makes me miss all that fun side of the things that we used to do, as well as how much we achieved as well. So thank you, and to all the peer educators for everything you do.
That was good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's the working.
Right, okay, so we'll move on. Before I do so, I know some people have just joined, so I want to take a little moment just to remind people, please, that there are 3 brief questions in the chat bar. If you could please answer them if you haven't already, it'll just help us give some feedback to how we're doing with these webinars. And an opportunity for questions and answers will be given right at the end of the talk. So without further ado, I'd like to now introduce Dr. Inderjeet Singh. He is a retired medical practitioner, having done his MBBS at Medical College Amritsar in India in 1971 and his FRCS in the UK in 1979. Dr. Singh retired after working in the NHS for more than 30 years as a general practitioner in Drumchapel, Glasgow, and as an ENT specialist at Hermias Hospital, East Kilbride. Dr. Singh's wife is a retired teacher. They have 2 children and 4 grandchildren, all living in Glasgow, which is his adopted home, he says, for the last 30 years. Dr. Singh is an executive member and trustee at Central Gurdwara Singh Sabha, Glasgow, and a director at Interfaith Scotland, representing the Sikh community. I'm really delighted as well to say that Dr. Singh has been a valued peer educator with us at Kidney Research UK for the last 5 years or so. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Over to you.
Thank you. Sat Sri Akal, Namaste, Assalamu Alaikum, and hello. Thank you very much, Neerja, for asking me to speak about kidney disease and organ donation with particular reference to Southeast Asian. And also thank you very much for your glorious introduction. Now, before I start, I must tell that I've been asked that if it's possible to speak in Punjabi. So my talk will be more in Punjabi than in English, but there may be mixed some part, but slides you can still see. So I will apologize to those few people who do not understand Punjabi, that I'm sorry, but later on, if necessary, we can talk in English as well.
Oh, sorry.
So, Mavisha, thank you very much for helping. Now, can we start with the slide? No, before we go on to doing the kidney disease, अपन पहला ये देखना है कि kidneys ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਕੀ ਹੈਗਾ, kidneys ਕਰਦੀਆਂ ਕੀ ਨੇ, function ਕੀ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ 2 kidneys ਨਾਲ born ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਪਰ ਲਾਈਫ 'ਚ ਜੇ ਇੱਕ kidney healthy ਹੋਏ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰੀਬ normal life ਰਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਇਸੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਲੋਕ ਇੱਕ kidney ਆਪਣੇ loved one ਨੂੰ ਦੇ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ। ਕਿਡਨੀ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬਲੱਡ ਚੋਂ ਟੌਕਸਿਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਕੱਢਦੀ ਏ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹਦਾ ਵੇਸਟ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਉਹ ਯੂਰਿਨ 'ਚ ਚਲਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਦੂਜਾ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਵਾਟਰ ਬੈਲੈਂਸ ਸਾਡੀ ਬਾਡੀ ਦਾ ਕਰਦੀ ਏ। ਤੀਜਾ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੈਮੀਕਲਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਸੋਡੀਅਮ ਪੋਟਾਸ਼ੀਅਮ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਬੈਲੈਂਸ ਕਰਦੀ ਏ। ਬਲੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਨੂੰ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕਰਦੀ ਏ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਹਾਰਮੋਨ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਐਰੀਥਰੋਪਾਇਟਿਨ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਉਹ ਹਾਰਮੋਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਰੈੱਡ ਬਲੱਡ ਸੈੱਲ ਸਾਡੇ ਬਾਡੀ 'ਚ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਣਾਉਂਦਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਕਸੀਜਨ ਕੈਰੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਨੈਕਸਟ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਮਨ ਕਾਜ਼ਸ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਦੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਪੈਦਾਇਸ਼ੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਆਪਾਂ ਬੋਰਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪੋਲੀਸਿਸਟਿਕ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਨਾਲ ਕਈ ਬੱਚੇ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ। ਇਨਫੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਨੈਫਰਾਈਟਿਸ ਹੈ, ਗਲੋਮਰੁਲੋਨੇਫਰਾਈਟਿਸ, ਇੰਜਰੀ, ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਐਕਸੀਡੈਂਟ ਹੋਏ ਤੇ ਕਿਡਨੀਜ਼ ਡੈਮੇਜ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ। ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਕਾਮਨ ਕਾਜ਼ਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ 'ਚ ਹਾਈ ਬਲੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਤੇ ਡਾਇਬਟੀਜ਼, ਸ਼ੂਗਰ, ਇਹ ਫਿਰ ਬਲੋਕੇਜ ਯੂਰਿਨ ਦਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਕਾਰਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪੱਥਰੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ, ਸਟੋਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ ਕਿਡਨੀ 'ਚ ਜਾਂ ਯੂਰੇਟਰ 'ਚ, ਤੇ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ, ਤਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਬਲੋਕੇਜ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਰੇ ਉਹ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਦੂਜਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੋਰ ਕਾਮਨ ਕਾਜ਼ ਹੈਗਾ ਆਇਟਰੋਜੈਨਿਕ, ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਈ ਦਵਾਈਆਂ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਰਥਰਾਈਟਿਸ ਲਈ ਬਹੁਤ ਲੰਬੀ ਸਮੇਂ ਲਈ ਦਵਾਈਆਂ ਲੈ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਬਰੂਫਨ ਵਗੈਰਾ, ਜਾਂ ਡਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਲਈ ਲਿਥੀਅਮ ਵਗੈਰਾ, ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡੈਮੇਜ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ। ਨੈਕਸਟ। ਡਾਇਗਨੋਸ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਰੀਦਾ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਨੂੰ? ਤਾਂ ਯੂਰਿਨ ਟੈਸਟ ਕਰਕੇ, ਯੂਰਿਨ 'ਚ ਬਲੱਡ ਆ ਸਕਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੀਨ ਆ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ। ਫਿਰ ਦੂਜਾ ਬਲੱਡ ਟੈਸਟ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ EGFR, ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟਿਨਿਨ, ਯੂਰੀਆ ਐਂਡ ਇਲੈਕਟ੍ਰੋਲਾਈਟਸ। EGFR ਦੱਸਦਾ ਕਿ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਫਿਲਟਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਆਪਾਂ ਐਕਸ-ਰੇਜ਼ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਅਲਟਰਾਸਾਊਂਡ ਸਕੈਨ, ਸੀਟੀ ਸਕੈਨ, MRI ਸਕੈਨ, ਤੇ ਕਈ ਕੇਸਿਸ 'ਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਾਇਓਪਸੀ ਵੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਪੈ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਛੋਟਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਪੀਸ ਲੈ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਨੈਕਸਟ, ਕੀ ਸਿੰਪਟਮ, ਲੱਛਣ ਕੀ ਹੋਣਗੇ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਦੇ? ਅਰਲੀ ਸਟੇਜਸ 'ਚ ਜਦ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ 'ਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਸਟੇਜ 'ਚ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਸਿੰਪਟਮ ਨਾ ਹੋਏ, ਪਰ ਲੇਟਰ ਔਨ ਸਿੰਪਟਮਸ ਇਹ ਆ ਸਕਦੇ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪਿਸ਼ਾਬ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੈਗਾ, ਯੂਰਿਨ ਘੱਟ ਆਉਣ ਲੱਗ ਗਿਆ, ਜਦ ਥੋੜਾ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਤੇ ਜਲਦੀ ਆਉਂਦਾ, ਤੇ ਪੇਨ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਆ ਸਕਦਾ। ਸਾਡੇ ਸਵੈਲਿੰਗ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਲੱਤਾਂ 'ਚ, ਥੱਲੇ ਗਿੱਟਿਆਂ 'ਚ, ਪੈਰਾਂ 'ਚ, ਹੱਥਾਂ 'ਚ, ਬਹੁਤ ਥਕਾਵਟ, ਟਾਇਰਡਨੈਸ ਫੀਲਿੰਗ, ਤੇ ਦੂਜਾ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਕਿ ਲਾਸ ਆਫ ਐਪੀਟਾਈਟ, ਭੁੱਖ ਤਾਂ ਮਰ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ weight loss ਹੋਣ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਜਿਹਦਾ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿਉਂ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ। ਫਿਰ ਉਲਟੀਆਂ ਆਉਣੀਆਂ ਜਾਂ ਜੀ ਕੱਚਾ ਹੋਣਾ, ਵੋਮਟਿੰਗ ਵਗੈਰਾ, ਸਿਰ ਦਰਦ, ਜਾਂ ਦਿਮਾਗ 'ਚ ਏਦਾਂ ਲੱਗਣਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਥਿੰਕਿੰਗ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ, ਤੇ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਸੀਵੀਅਰ ਕੇਸਿਸ 'ਚ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਰੀਰ 'ਚ ਖਾਰਿਸ਼, ਇਚਿੰਗ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ। ਨੈਕਸਟ, ਸਟੇਜਸ, ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਤੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਾਉਣਾ, ਇਹੀ ਹੈ ਇੰਨਾ ਕਿ 5 ਸਟੇਜਸ 'ਚ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਡਿਵਾਈਡ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਪਹਿਲੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਨੀਅਰ ਨਾਰਮਲ ਹੈ, ਸਟੇਜ 5 ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਫੇਲਿਅਰ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਸ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਇਹ ਤੇ ਡਿਪੈਂਡ ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਇਹ GFR ਫਿਲਟਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਬੇਸਿਸ ਤੇ ਬਣਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਨੈਕਸਟ, ਕਿਹਨੂੰ ਟੈਸਟ ਕਰਾਉਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ? ਰੈਗੂਲਰ ਟੈਸਟ ਅਸੀਂ ਰਿਕਮੈਂਡ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵੀ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਹਾਈ ਬਲੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਹੈ, ਡਾਇਬਟੀਜ਼ ਹੈ, ਜਾਂ ਹਾਈ ਕੋਲੇਸਟਰੋਲ ਹੈ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਰੈਗੂਲਰ ਟੈਸਟ ਕਰਾਓ ਕਿ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡੈਮੇਜ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ। ਅਕਿਊਟ ਇੰਜਰੀ ਹੋਏ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਐਕਸੀਡੈਂਟ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ, ਜਾਂ ਬਲੋਕੇਜ, ਜਾਂ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਸਟੋਨਸ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਨਾਲ, ਪ੍ਰੋਸਟੇਟ ਐਨਲਾਰਜਮੈਂਟ ਨਾਲ, ਜੇ ਲੌਂਗ ਟਰਮ ਮੈਡੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਕੋਈ ਲੋਕੀ ਲੈ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਡਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਲਈ, ਸਾਈਕੋਸਿਸ ਲਈ, ਬਲੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਕਈ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਮੈਡੀਸਿਨ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਥੋੜੀਆਂ, ਤੇ ਆਰਥਰਾਈਟਿਸ ਲਈ ਵੀ। ਜਾਂ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੈਡੀਕਲ ਲਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵੈਸੇ, ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹ ਯੂਰਿਨ ਟੈਸਟ ਨਾਰਮਲੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਜੇ ਬਲੱਡ ਜਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੀਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਯੂਰਿਨ ਦੇ ਆ ਜਾਏ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪੂਰੇ ਟੈਸਟ ਕਰਾਉਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ। ਨੈਕਸਟ, ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਸਟਾਰਟ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿ ਦਿਆਂ ਕਿ ਇਹਦਾ ਇਲਾਜ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ। ਜਦੋਂ ਹੋ ਜੇ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਹਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੱਛਣ ਨੇ, ਜੋ ਸਿੰਪਟਮਸ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਣਾ। ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੋਂ ਅਗਲੀ ਸਟੇਜ 'ਚ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਵਰਸ ਨਾ ਹੋ ਜੇ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਰੋਕਣਾ, ਇਸ ਲਈ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਤੇ ਦੂਜਾ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਡਿਪੈਂਡ ਕਰਦੀ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਹੈਗੇ। ਪਹਿਲੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ 3 ਸਟੇਜਾਂ ਨੇ 1 2 3, ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਮੈਡੀਕਲ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਕਾਫੀ ਠੀਕ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਨਾਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਸਟਾਈਲ ਚੇਂਜਸ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਪੈਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੌਥੀ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਵੀਂ ਹੈ, ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਰਿਪਲੇਸਮੈਂਟ ਥੈਰੇਪੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਹੈ। ਹੁਣ ਮੈਡੀਕਲ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਕੀ ਹੈ? ਜਿਵੇਂ ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਡਾਇਬਟੀਜ਼ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਮੈਡੀਸਿਨ ਲੈਣੀਆਂ ਪੈ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਡਾਇਬਟਿਕ ਡਾਈਟ, ਇਨਸੂਲਿਨ, ਤੇ ਜੇ ਬਲੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਮੈਡੀਸਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵੀ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਮਝੇ ਠੀਕ ਉਹ ਦੇਣੀ ਹੈ। ਜੇ ਹਾਈ ਕੋਲੇਸਟਰੋਲ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਸਟੈਟਿਨ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਲੈਣੀਆਂ ਪੈ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਪਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਸਟਾਈਲ ਚੇਂਜਸ ਵੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਗੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਡਿਸਕਸ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਜੇ ਰਿਪਲੇਸਮੈਂਟ ਥੈਰੇਪੀ, ਨੈਕਸਟ, ਰਿਪਲੇਸਮੈਂਟ ਥੈਰੇਪੀ ਕੀ ਹੈ? ਰਿਪਲੇਸਮੈਂਟ ਥੈਰੇਪੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਕਰਨਾ ਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪਲਾਂਟ ਕਰਨਾ। ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਹੀਮੋਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਇੱਕ ਪੈਰੀਟੋਨੀਅਲ ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਪਏ 3 ਵਾਰੀ ਵੀਕ 'ਚ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ, ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਕਰਨ 'ਚ 3-4 ਘੰਟੇ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾ ਸੋਲਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਲੌਂਗ ਟਰਮ ਲਈ, ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਡਿਸਰਪਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਲਾਈਫ ਦੀ। ਤੇ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸਟਾਪ ਗੈਪ ਹੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਸਟੇਜ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਗਏ ਆ ਚੌਥੇ ਜਾਂ ਪੰਜਵੇਂ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪਲਾਂਟ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਪੈ ਗਈ ਹੈ, ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਜਦ ਤੱਕ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਵੇਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ, ਉਦੋਂ ਤੱਕ ਲਈ ਇਹ ਕਰਨਾ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ। ਕਿਡਨੀ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪਲਾਂਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਉਹ ਡਿਸੀਜ਼ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡੈਥ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ, ਜਾਂ ਲਿਵਿੰਗ ਡੋਨਰ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੁਲੀਗ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਦੱਸਣਗੇ। ਨੈਕਸਟ ਪਲੀਜ਼। ਹਾਂ, ਲਾਈਫ ਸਟਾਈਲ ਨੈਕਸਟ। ਅੱਛਾ, ਹਾਂ, ਓਕੇ। ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਦਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਦਾ ਮੇਨ ਮਕਸਦ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਸੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਸਿੰਪਟਮ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਵਰਸ ਨਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ ਇੱਕ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੋਂ ਅਗਲੀ ਸਟੇਜ। ਤੇ ਨਾਲੇ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਬਿਮਾਰੀਆਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ, ਡਾਇਬਟੀਜ਼, ਬਲੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ, ਹਾਈ ਬਲੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਜਾਂ ਹਾਈ ਕੋਲੇਸਟਰੋਲ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ CVD, ਕਾਰਡੀਓਵਾਸਕੂਲਰ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਵੀ ਕਰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਹਾਰਟ ਤੇ ਸਟ੍ਰੋਕ, ਹਾਰਟ ਅਟੈਕ ਤੇ ਸਟ੍ਰੋਕ। ਸੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਬਚਾਉਂਦਾ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਕੁਆਇਟ ਹੈਲਪਫੁਲ। ਨੈਕਸਟ ਪਲੀਜ਼। ਲਾਈਫ ਸਟਾਈਲ ਚੇਂਜਸ ਕਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਧਿਆਨ ਰੱਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ? ਪਹਿਲੇ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਸਮੋਕਿੰਗ ਹੈਗਾ। ਸਮੋਕਿੰਗ ਕੱਲਾ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਲਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਇਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਦੂਜੇ ਲੰਗ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਲਈ ਵੀ, ਹਾਰਟ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਲਈ ਵੀ, ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਬਿਮਾਰੀਆਂ ਲਈ ਹਾਊਸ ਹੈ। ਦੈਨ ਹੈਲਥੀ ਐਂਡ ਬੈਲੈਂਸਡ ਡਾਈਟ, ਮਤਲਬ ਡਾਈਟ ਸਾਡੇ ਤਿੰਨੋਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀਆਂ, ਪ੍ਰੋਟੀਨ, ਕਾਰਬੋਹਾਈਡਰੇਟ ਤੇ ਫੈਟ। ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ 2000 ਦੇ ਕਰੀਬ ਕੈਲਰੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਐਵਰੇਜ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ, ਤੇ ਕਾਰਬੋਹਾਈਡਰੇਟ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਬਲੀ ਹਾਫ ਆਫ ਇਟ ਸ਼ੁੱਡ ਬੀ ਕਾਰਬੋਹਾਈਡਰੇਟ। ਫਿਰ ਸਾਲਟ ਇਨਟੇਕ, ਇਹ 6 ਗ੍ਰਾਮ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਬਾਡੀ 'ਚ ਡੇਲੀ। ਤੇ 6 ਗ੍ਰਾਮ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਮਝੋ 1 ਟੀਸਪੂਨ ਫੁੱਲ ਹੀ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫੂਡ ਆਪਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੀਜ਼ਰਵਡ ਫੂਡ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਟੇਕ ਅਵੇ ਫੂਡ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਇਹਦੀ ਮਿਕਦਾਰ ਸਾਲਟ ਦੀ ਆਲਰੇਡੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫੂਡ ਵਾਚ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੇ, ਅਚਾਰ ਤੇ ਚਟਨੀਆਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਲਟ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ। ਐਕਸਰਸਾਈਜ਼, ਰੈਗੂਲਰ ਐਕਸਰਸਾਈਜ਼, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ 'ਚ 3 ਵਾਰੀ ਐਕਸਰਸਾਈਜ਼ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅੱਧੇ ਘੰਟੇ ਲਈ ਕਰ ਲਓ, ਪਰ ਐਕਸਰਸਾਈਜ਼ ਉਹ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਹ ਚੜ੍ਹਦਾ। ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ ਵਾਕ ਕਰਨਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲੋਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਥੋੜੀ ਸਟਰਨੂਅਸ ਐਕਸਰਸਾਈਜ਼। ਐਲਕੋਹਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਪੀਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ, ਪਰ ਮੈਕਸਿਮਮ ਜੇ ਅਲਾਉਡ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ 14 ਯੂਨਿਟਸ ਪਰ ਵੀਕ। weight, ਜੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ weight ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਦਾ, ਉਹ ਘਟਾਓਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਹੈਲਪ ਹੋਣਗੀਆਂ। So loss of weight, so control of obesity. Next, please. ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਲਈਏ, ਚਲੋ next please. ਹੁਣ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ 'ਚ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰ ਲਈਏ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਕਾਮਨ ਕੀ ਹੈਗਾ। ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ 'ਚ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਹੀ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਸੀ, ਬੁਸ਼ਰਾ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਮੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਵੀ, ਕਿ ਟਾਈਪ 2 ਡਾਇਬਟੀਜ਼ ਤੇ ਹਾਈਪਰਟੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ 'ਚ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ 'ਚ ਬੜੇ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਮੇਨਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੰਡੀਆ, ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ, ਬੰਗਲਾਦੇਸ਼, ਨਾਲ ਅਫਗਾਨਿਸਤਾਨ, ਤੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਨੇੜੇ ਨੇੜੇ ਦੇ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ, ਜਿੱਥੋਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਲੋਕ ਇੱਥੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਆਏ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ। ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਾਇਬਟੀਜ਼ ਹੈਗੀ, ਤਾਂ ਉਹ 10 ਗੁਣਾ ਚਾਂਸਸ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹਦੀ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਫੇਲਿਅਰ ਹੋ ਜਾਏਗੀ ਕੰਪੇਅਰ ਟੂ ਇਸ ਵਾਈਟ ਇੰਡੀਜੀਨਸ ਪਾਪੂਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ। ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਾਊਥ ਈਸਟ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ 'ਚ, ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਲੇਟ ਸਟੇਜਸ 'ਚ ਆ ਕੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਐਂਡ ਸਟੇਜ ਰੀਨਲ ਫੇਲਿਅਰ। ਇਹਦਾ ਕਿਉਂ ਕਾਰਨ ਹੈ? ਮੇਬੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ ਨੌਨ ਕੰਪਲਾਇੰਸ ਹੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਤੇ ਜਾਣ ਤੋਂ ਝਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਡਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਨੌਨ ਮੈਡੀਕਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲ 'ਚ ਜਾਣ 'ਚ ਬਿਲੀਵ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕੁਐਕਸ ਤੋਂ ਚਲੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਬਾਬਿਆਂ ਕੋਲ ਜਾਣ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੜਾ ਰਿਵਾਜ ਹੈਗਾ, ਉਹਨੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਧੂੜੀਆਂ ਲੈਣੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਲੈਣੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਟੂਨੇ, ਜਾਦੂ ਟੂਨੇ ਲੈਣੇ। ਦੂਜਾ ਇਹ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ, ਨੈਕਸਟ ਪਲੀਜ਼, ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਲੈਂਗੁਏਜ ਬੈਰੀਅਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋਣ। ਤੇ ਦੂਜਾ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਰਿਸੋਰਸਿਸ ਘੱਟ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਘਰ 'ਚ, ਤੇ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੀ ਪੋਸੀਬਲ ਐ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਐਂਡ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਅਸੀਂ। ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਫੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਉਹ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਘਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਪਸ ਜਾਣਾ ਪਿਆ ਛੁੱਟੀ ਲਈ, ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਮੈਰਿਜ ਲਈ, ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੋਈ ਬਿਮਾਰ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਡੈਥ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਰੇਂਜ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ। ਉਹ ਬੜੀ ਮੁਸ਼ਕਲ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੂਰ ਦੂਰ ਪਿੰਡਾਂ 'ਚ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਸ਼ਹਿਰਾਂ 'ਚ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਨੇ ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਦੇ, ਤੇ ਜੇ ਮਿਲ ਵੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਉਹਨੀ ਕਲੀਨਲੀਨੈਸ, ਸਟਰਲਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ, ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਨਫੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦਾ ਬੜਾ ਡਰ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ। ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇਖੀਏ ਕਿ ਕਈ ਲੋਕ ਜਦੋਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਉੱਥੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਟੈਂਪਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਖਰੀਦ ਲਈਏ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉੱਥੇ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਵੀ ਕਾਲ ਇਟ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪਲਾਂਟ ਟੂਰਿਜ਼ਮ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਖਰੀਦ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਰਾ ਲਈਏ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵੀ ਡੇਂਜਰ ਕਾਫੀ ਹੈਗੇ। ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਲੀਗਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ, ਖਰੀਦ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ। ਦੂਜਾ ਆਫਟਰ ਕੇਅਰ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹੀ ਸਟਰਲਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਹੈਪੇਟਾਈਟਸ ਸੀ ਕਈਆਂ 'ਚ ਹੋਣ ਦਾ ਡਰ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ। ਇੱਕ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਊਥ ਈਸਟ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ 'ਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਛੋਟੇ ਹੁੰਦਿਆਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਟੀਬੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਈ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਡੋਰਮੈਂਟ ਪਈ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਰੀਐਕਟੀਵੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ। ਨੈਕਸਟ ਪਲੀਜ਼। ਸੋ ਆਰਗਨ ਡੋਨੇਸ਼ਨ, ਮੈਂ ਬੁਸ਼ਰਾ ਨੇ ਮੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਹੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨੀਡ ਸਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੈਗੀ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪਲਾਂਟ ਲਈ, ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੇਟਿੰਗ ਲਿਸਟ ਤੇ ਡੋਨਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਘੱਟ ਹੈ। ਕਿ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਕਿ BAME ਵੇਟਿੰਗ ਲਿਸਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ 25% ਦੇ ਕਰੀਬ ਨੇ, ਤੇ ਜੇ ਡੋਨੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਆਪਣੀ 3% ਹੀ ਸਿਰਫ। ਤੇ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੌਂਗ ਵੇਟਿੰਗ ਲਿਸਟ ਤੇ ਰਹਿਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ, 1 ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਕਰੀਬ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਾਈਟ ਪਰਸਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੇਟਿੰਗ ਲਿਸਟ ਤੇ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪਲਾਂਟ ਦਾ। ਇਹਦਾ ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਕੀ ਹੈ? ਇਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪਲਾਂਟ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਦੀ ਸਕਸੈਸ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਸੇਮ ਬੈਕਗ੍ਰਾਉਂਡ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਹੋਏ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਦੀ ਮੈਚਿੰਗ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟਿਸ਼ੂ ਤੇ ਬਲੱਡ ਮੈਚਿੰਗ ਉਹਦੇ ਬੈਟਰ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੇਮ ਬੈਕਗ੍ਰਾਉਂਡ ਤੇ ਰੈਸਿਪੀਐਂਟ ਤੇ ਡੋਨਰ ਹੋਣ। ਨੈਕਸਟ ਪਲੀਜ਼। ਅਖੀਰ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਸ ਸਮਰੀ ਚ ਦੱਸਣਾ ਇਹੀ ਚਾਹਾਂਗਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਰਿਸਕ ਫੈਕਟਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹਰ ਵੇਲੇ ਉਸ ਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਰੱਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਟੈਸਟ ਅਰਲੀ ਡਿਟੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਡਿਜ਼ੀਜ਼ ਦੀ ਹੋਏਗੀ ਤੇ ਟ੍ਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਉਹਦੀ ਪਲਾਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਏਗੀ ਤੇ ਅਰਲੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਏਗੀ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਚੌਥੇ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਵੇਂ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਪਹੁੰਚਣ ਤੋਂ ਬਚਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪਲਾਂਟ ਤੋਂ ਬਚਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਦੂਜਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਮਿਊਨੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਇੰਪਰੂਵ ਕਰਨੀ ਪਏਗੀ ਤੇ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਅਵੇਅਰਨੈਸ ਦਾ ਕਰਾਉਣਾ ਪਏਗਾ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਤੇ ਨਾਲੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਪਏਗਾ ਕਿ ਆਰਗਨ ਡੋਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਆਓ ਤੇ ਅਰਜ਼ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਕਰਨਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਕਰੋ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ 'ਚ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਰਗਨ ਡੋਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਦਾ ਫਾਰਮ ਭਰਿਆ ਤੇ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਨਾਲ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਕਰੋ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਦੀ ਜੇ ਲੋੜ ਪਏ ਤਾਂ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਹਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਇੱਛਾ। ਨੈਕਸਟ ਪਲੀਜ਼। ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ। ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਬਸ ਇਹੀ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਰਜਨੀ ਤੇਜਵਾਨੀ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੁਕਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰ ਹਾਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੁਝ ਸਲਾਈਡਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ। ਕਿਡਨੀ ਰਿਸਰਚ ਨੀਰਜਾ ਜੈਨ ਤੇ ਬੁਸ਼ਰਾ ਰਿਆਜ਼ ਦਾ ਹੈਲਪ ਕੀਤੀ ਸਲਾਈਡਾਂ 'ਚ। ਸਕਾਟਿਸ਼ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਦਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸੈਮੀਨਾਰ ਅਰੇਂਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਐਂਡ ਆਲ ਆਫ ਯੂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਏ ਹੋ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦਾ। ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ। ਸੌਰੀ ਤੇਜ਼ੀ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਪਿਆ ਕੋਈ ਟਾਈਮ।
No worries. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for the bahut dhanyawad, and thank you for saying it so eloquently in Punjabi as well, because it just helps us reach even more people. You did it in English last time, so I think everybody would have heard. So between the two sessions, I think you covered everybody, and I learned a few extra words in Punjabi from you as well. So thank you. Can I just ask, please, everybody, can you keep yourself on mute? We did have some background noise just there. So please keep yourself on mute until you're asked to speak. We will have opportunity for questions right at the very end for those who've just joined. But in the meantime, I will move on and invite the next speakers. So we have Satnam and Paramjit Kang. Pam, as she likes to be called, works as a healthcare assistant at the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital in Birmingham. She's a volunteer at the QE Hospital as well. She's a busy lady. Pam is also a volunteer peer educator with our charity, Kidney Research UK, and along with her husband for about the last 5 years, they have done some fantastic work with us, attending a number of events and raising awareness in gurdwaras and public places. If all that wasn't enough to impress you, this lady, as you'll hear, donated one of her kidneys so that in turn her husband Satnam would receive a kidney transplant in 2013. Satnam Singh Kang, or Sam as we call him, is married to Pam, and they have a lovely, beautiful family for whom they are blessed. And I've met a couple of them, so I agree with that. He worked for the railways for 42 years. Sadly, at a very young age, he was diagnosed with kidney failure. The cause was diabetes, which he had no clue that he had. Satnam says, with the help of Vaheguruji, doctors, surgeons, nurses, and his family, he had got through this and has a very healthy kidney now. He's retired and continues to do some wonderful volunteering work with us as a peer educator, which he's been doing for several years. Thank you, Sam and Pam. Over to you.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ। ਮੇਰਾ ਨਾਮ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਕੰਗ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸ਼ੂਗਰ 1984 ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇਨਸੂਲਿਨ ਦਾ ਇੰਜੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਲਾਉਂਦਾ ਸੀ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਮਝਾਇਆ ਸੀ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਤੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਸਮਝਾਇਆ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਬੇਸਿਕਲੀ ਤਿੰਨ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਆ, ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਨਿਗਾਹ ਨੂੰ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਆ, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪੈਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਆ, ਤੁਹਾਡੀਆਂ ਨਾ ਕਿਡਨੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਆ। ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੜਾ ਇੰਨਾ ਗੌਰ ਕੀਤਾ, ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਨਾ, ਮੈਂ ਬਸ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਜਿੱਦ ਮੇਰੀ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਚੱਲੇਗਾ। ਸੰਨ 2000 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਰੀ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਫੇਲ ਯਕਦਮ ਹੋ ਗਈ। ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਾ ਵੀ ਫੇਲ ਹੋਣ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਆਈ ਆ, ਜਦੋਂ ਫੇਲ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਾ। ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਮੈਂ 3 ਦਫਾ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਡਾਇਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ, ਸੋਮਵਾਰ, ਬੁੱਧਵਾਰ ਤੇ ਸ਼ੁੱਕਰਵਾਰ, ਤੇ 5-6 ਘੰਟੇ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਅੱਧਾ ਘੰਟਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀ ਮਸ਼ੀਨ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲਾਉਣ ਨੂੰ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ 4.5 ਘੰਟੇ ਮੈਂ ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਇੰਨੇ ਦਿਨਾਂ 'ਚ। ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਠੀਕ ਆ, ਪਰਹੇਜ਼ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ, ਪਰਹੇਜ਼ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਗੋਲੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਖਾਣੀਆਂ ਪੈਂਦੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਦੀਆਂ, ਤੇ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਤਾਂ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਜੇ ਕੁਆਲਿਟੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ 'ਚ ਕਹੀਏ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਸਾਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵੇਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ। ਮੈਂ 12.5 ਸਾਲ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਉਡੀਕ ਕੀਤੀ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੀ ਨੇ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਪੇਡ ਐਕਸਚੇਂਜ ਸਕੀਮ ਤੇ। ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਲੱਕ ਸੀ, ਕਿਸਮਤ। ਹੁਣ ਸਵਾਰੀ ਸੀ, ਜੇ ਇੱਕ ਦਰਵਾਜ਼ਾ ਬੰਦ ਕੀਤਾ 2 ਦਰਵਾਜ਼ੇ ਖੋਲੇ। ਮੇਰੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ, ਡਾਇਲਾਇਜ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਮੈਂ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ। ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦਾ A ਲੈਵਲ ਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਆ ਗਿਆ, ਉਧਰੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਬਿਮਾਰ ਪਿਆ ਸੀ, ਤੇ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੀ ਸੀ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਚਲੋ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਸੀ ਰੇਲਵੇ 'ਚ ਮੇਰੀ ਪੇ, ਮੈਂ ਲੱਕੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਸ ਗੱਲੋਂ। ਤੇ 3 ਇਨਸਾਨ ਦਿਹਾੜੀ ਦੇ ਪੂਰੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਕਿੰਨੀ ਉਡੀਕ ਦੇ, ਇੱਕ ਹੀ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਆਪਣੇ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੂਰੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਸਿਰਫ ਉਡੀਕ ਦੇ। ਵੀ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਦੀ ਉਡੀਕ ਆ, ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ, ਕੋਈ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ। ਡਾਇਲਸਿਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਕਰਦੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਤੁਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਦੇਖੇ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਦੋਂ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਆਈਦਾ ਦੂਏ ਸੈਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੇ, ਜਾਂ ਉਹ ਐਡਮਿਟ ਹੋਏ ਆ, ਇਨਸਾਨ ਫਿਕਰ ਪੈ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਤੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਖਬਰ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਪੂਰਾ ਜਿੰਦਾ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਉਹ ਪੂਰੀ ਹੋ ਗਈ। ਮੇਰੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਬਈ GCSE ਆਪਦੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਫਿਰ A ਲੈਵਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਇੱਕ ਮੇਰੀ ਬੇਟੀ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਰਹੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਸ਼ੈਫੀਲਡ ਹੈਲਮ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦਾ ਸਕੋਲਰਸ਼ਿਪ ਮਿਲ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ। 2013 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਨਵਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਅਪੇਅਰ ਐਜੂਕੇਟ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬੰਦ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਮੇਰਾ ਖੂਨ ਮੇਰੀ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੀ ਖੂਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਿਲੇ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਵੀ ਰਲ ਜਾਊਗੀ, ਤੇ ਵੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਐਂਟੀਬਾਡੀਜ਼ ਇੱਕ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਪਾ ਸਕਣ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਕੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਫੇਲ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ। ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਾਇਆ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਬਈ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਸਕੀਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਟਰਾਈ ਕਰ ਲਓ, ਪੇਡ ਐਕਸਚੇਂਜ ਸਕੀਮ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਣ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਆ ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਦੇਣ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਆ। ਉੱਥੇ ਬਾਬੇ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਸੁਣ ਲਈ। ਮੈਨੂੰ 3 ਮਹੀਨਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਦੀ ਮਿਲ ਗਈ ਮੈਨੂੰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਫੋਨ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਮੈਨੂੰ। ਮੈਂ ਹੌਲੀਡੇ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਬਾਰਸਲੋਨਾ ਨੂੰ, ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫੋਨ ਆਇਆ ਜਾਣ ਦੇ ਵੇਲੇ, ਤੇ ਬਈ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਤਿਆਰ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਕਹੋਗੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਮੇਰਾ 1 ਤਰੀਕ ਤੇ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਸੰਨ 2013 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਰਾ ਆਪਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ, ਤੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਰੱਖੇ ਸੁੱਖ ਵੀ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਠੀਕ ਠਾਕ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ। ਮਹੀਨੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਹਸਪੀਟਲ, ਉਹ ਖੂਨ ਟੈਸਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਤੇ ਖੂਨ ਟੈਸਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਕੀ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਪਰਹੇਜ਼ ਮੈਂ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਹਜੇ ਵੀ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਆ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਪੈ ਗਈ ਆ। ਮੈਂ 3 ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਤੋਂ ਡਾਇਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦਾ 4 ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਵੀ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗ ਪਿਆ ਸੀ। ਐਤਵਾਰ ਵੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਸੀ, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਿਤੇ ਜਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਸਕਦਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਵਿਆਹ ਸ਼ਾਦੀ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ। ਆਪਣੇ ਲੋਕ ਗੁੱਸਾ ਮਨਾਉਂਦੇ ਵੇ ਉਹ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਆਇਆ ਨਹੀਂ, ਤੇ ਮਜਬੂਰੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਿੰਨਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਾਵਾਂਗੇ। ਇੱਕ ਨੂੰ, 2 ਨੂੰ, ਤੀਜਾ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਇਹ ਪੱਜ ਮਾਰਦਾ ਆਪਦਾ, 100 ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ। ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਪੈ ਗਈ ਤੇ ਆਪਦੇ ਮਨ 'ਚ ਸਲਾਹ ਬਣਾਈ ਹੋਈ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਆਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੈ। ਮੇਰੇ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਭੈਣ ਭਾਈ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਭੈਣ ਭਾਈ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਗੋਰੇ ਵੀ ਭੈਣ ਭਾਈ ਆ ਸਭ। ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਡਾ MP ਉਹ ਡਾਇਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਘਰ ਦੀ ਟ੍ਰੇਨਿੰਗ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਘਰੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਮਸ਼ੀਨ ਤੇ ਆਪਦੇ ਮਸ਼ੀਨ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਘਰੇ ਟ੍ਰੇਨ ਕਰੀਏ। ਉਹਦਾ ਭਾਈ ਪੂਰਾ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਉਡੀਕ ਦਾ। ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਸਾਡਾ ਕੋਈ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ। ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਈਦਾ, ਇਨਸਾਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਾਈਦਾ, ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰੀਦਾ BP, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਰਸ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਕੋਈ ਇੱਕ ਆਪਣੇ ਲੋਕ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ, ਉਹ ਡਰਦੇ ਆ, 100 ਚੀਜ਼ ਤੋਂ ਡਰਦੇ ਆ। ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਅਨਪੜ੍ਹ, ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੜ੍ਹੇ ਲਿਖੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੋਲਣੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ, ਜਾਂ ਉਹ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ। ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਆ। ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਮਝਾਈਏ। ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਮਝਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਆ, ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਦਾ ਫਾਰਮ ਭਰਾਈਦਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉੱਥੇ ਸਮਝਾਉਂਦੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਘਰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਸਮਝਾਓ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰੋ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਜੇ ਏਦਾਂ ਹੋ ਜਾਵੇ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਅੰਗ ਸੰਗ ਵੀ ਆ ਡੋਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਦਿਓ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ। ਆਪਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਚ ਵੀ ਸਾੜਨੇ ਹੀ ਆ, ਸਾੜਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਥੋੜੀ ਸੌਖੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਊ। ਮੋਰੇ ਮੇਰੀ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੀ ਆ, ਇਹਨੇ ਮੇਰੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਬੜੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ, ਢਿੱਡ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਲਈ ਪੜਾਇਆ, ਤੇ ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੂਗੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸਾਂਭਿਆ ਕਰਦਾ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਸੁਣ ਲਿਆ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਇੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੋਂ, ਨਿਰਜਤ ਤੋਂ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਬੁਸ਼ਰਾ ਤੋਂ, ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਸੁਣੋਗੇ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਹ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਤੇ ਇਕੱਲਾ ਮਰੀਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਿਮਾਰ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਨਾਲ ਸਾਰਾ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਵੀ ਅਪਸੈਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ। ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਸਫਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ 12 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਆ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ। ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹ ਚਾਂਸ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨਸ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਡੋਨੇਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ, ਮਤਲਬ ਪੈਸੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੰਗਦਾਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ, ਆਪਾਂ ਡੋਨਰ ਕਾਰਡ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਾਈਨ ਕਰਦੇ, ਸੋ ਫਿਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਘੱਟ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਏ, ਪਰ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ। ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਦੇਣੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟਲੀ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ। ਪਰ ਬਾਬੇ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੋਰ ਆਪਸ਼ਨ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ, ਪੇਡ ਐਕਸਚੇਂਜ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਸਕਸੈਸਫੁਲ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। 2013 ਹੁਣ 8 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ, ਬਾਬੇ ਦੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੋਹਣੀ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਆ। ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚੱਲਦੀ, ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਖਾਣ ਪੀਣ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਿਦੇਸ਼ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ, ਪਾਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੀ ਸਕਦੇ, ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ। ਪਰ ਬਾਬੇ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਤੇ ਪਰ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਿਆ, ਡਾਕਟਰਾਂ ਨੇ, ਨਰਸਿੰਗ ਹਸਪੀਟਲ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਲੁੱਕ ਆਫਟਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਲੱਕੀ ਸੀਗੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੋਹਣੀ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਮਿਲ ਗਈ ਪੇਡ ਐਕਸਚੇਂਜ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਮੈਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ, ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਡਾਇਬੀਟਿਕ ਜਾਂ ਸ਼ੂਗਰ ਦੀ ਬਿਮਾਰੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਨਾ, ਚੁੱਪ ਨਾ ਰਹੋ, ਆਪਦੇ ਡਾਕਟਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਜਾਵੋ, ਡਾਕਟਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਾਵੋ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਆ, ਫਿਰ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸ਼ੂਗਰ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨੋਰਮਲ ਆਪਦੇ ਅਪਾਇੰਟਮੈਂਟਸ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਰੋ। ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਡਾਇਬੀਟਿਸ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸਲੋ ਕਿਲਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਇੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਖਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ, ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ, ਫਿਰ ਉਦੋਂ ਹੀ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕਿਡਨੀਆਂ ਖਰਾਬ ਹੋਣ ਲੱਗ ਪਈਆਂ ਵਾ। ਤੇ ਬਾਬੇ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਦੀ ਸਿਹਤ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਕਰੋ। ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਡੋਨਰ ਬਣਨਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਜਦੋਂ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਤੂੰ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਦੇ ਸਕਦੀ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਟੈਸਟ ਕੀਤੇ, ਕਾਫੀ ਬਲੱਡ ਟੈਸਟ ਕੀਤੇ, ਸਕੈਨਸ ਕੀਤੇ। ਸਿਰਫ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਦੇਤੀ ਬਾਅਦ ਚ ਮੈਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਰਹੂੰਗੀ, ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਠੀਕ ਰਹੂੰਗੀ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ। ਸੋ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਲੁੱਕ ਆਫਟਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਜਦੋਂ ਹੁਣ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਦੇਤੀ ਆ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਐਵਰੀ ਅਪਾਇੰਟਮੈਂਟਸ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਲੁੱਕ ਆਫਟਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੈ ਗਿਆ। ਸੋ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਡਨੀ ਵੀ ਦੇਣੀ ਆ, ਸਾਰੇ ਕੰਸਲਟੈਂਟ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਤੇ ਡਾਕਟਰਸ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਆ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਇਕੱਲਾ ਮਰੀਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਠੀਕ, ਜਿਹਨੇ ਡੋਨੇਟ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਬਾਅਦ ਚ ਠੀਕ ਰਵੇ। ਤੇ ਬਾਬੇ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਹਲੇ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਠੀਕ ਆ। ਸਿਰਫ ਆਪਣੇ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਅੰਗਦਾਨ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਣ ਨੂੰ ਡਰਦੇ ਆ, ਕਰਕੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਦਾ ਡਰ ਲੱਗਦਾ। ਪਰ ਬਾਬੇ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਡਾਕਟਰ, ਸਰਜਨਸ ਵਗੈਰਾ, ਕੰਸਲਟੈਂਟਸ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਵੈਲ ਟੂ ਨੋ ਨਾ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਸੋ ਬਾਬੇ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਹੱਥ ਜੋੜਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਡੋਨਰ ਕਾਰਡ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਸਾਈਨ ਕਰੋ। ਕਰਕੇ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਾਈਨ ਕੀਤਾ, ਆਪਣੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅੰਗ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਇੰਨੇ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਅੰਗ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਜੇ ਉਹੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਡੋਨਰ ਕਾਰਡ ਸਾਈਨ ਕਰ ਦਈਏ, ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਪੂਰੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹੀ ਅੰਗ ਕਿਸੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਰਗੀ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਦੀ ਥੋੜੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਲਾਈਫ ਸਟਾਈਲ ਜੀਣ ਲਈ ਠੀਕ ਰਹਿੰਦੀ ਆ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਸੋ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਆ, ਕਰਕੇ ਹੁਣ ਆਪਟ ਆਊਟ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਲੀਜ਼ opt out ਨਾ ਹੋਇਆ, ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਸਾਈਨ ਕਰਿਓ ਡੋਨਰ ਕਾਰਡ। ਜਦੋਂ ਡੋਨਰ ਕਾਰਡ ਸਾਈਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਨਾ, ਸਿਰਫ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਨਾ ਰੱਖਿਓ, ਪਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਆਪਦੀ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਓ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ ਵਿਸ਼ਿਸ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਰ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੰਗਦਾਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਵਾ। ਤੇ ਨਾਲੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਪੁੰਨਦਾਨ ਕਰੀਏ, ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰੀਏ, ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡਾ ਪੁੰਨ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ। ਗਿਫਟ ਆਫ ਲਾਈਫ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਦੇਖੋ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੋਨੋਂ ਜਣੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਇੱਥੇ, ਆਪਦੀ ਸਟੋਰੀ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਆ। ਕਈ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ਿਫਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 60-70 ਬੰਦੇ ਡਾਇਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਤੇ 4 ਸ਼ਿਫਟਾਂ ਤੇ ਥਾਂ ਡਾਇਲਾਈਜ਼ ਯੂਨਿਟਸ ਬਣੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਲਾ ਲਓ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਡਾਇਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ, ਕਿਡਨੀ ਵੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ। ਕੋਈ ਜਿਹਦਾ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਪੂਰੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਭੈਣ ਭਾਈ ਸੀ ਸਾਡੇ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਸੋ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਫਿਰ ਹੱਥ ਜੋੜ ਕੇ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕਰਦੀ ਹਾਂ, ਡੋਨਰ ਕਾਰਡ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਸਾਈਨ ਕਰੋ। ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਮਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਆਪਾਂ ਅਗਨੀ ਭੇਟਾ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਆਪਣੀ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੈਲਥੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਸੜ ਜਾਣੇ ਆ, ਸੁਆਹ ਬਣ ਜਾਣੇ ਆ। ਪਰ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਈਨ ਕੀਤੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਣਗੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਭਲਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਏਗਾ, ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੁੱਖ ਸ਼ਾਂਤੀ ਆ ਜਾਏਗੀ, ਥੋੜੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਤੰਦਰੁਸਤੀ ਆ ਜਾਏਗੀ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
Pam and Sam, thank you so much. Once again, I've heard your story so many times, but every time it does touch me. I wish I could reach out and give you a big hug for everything you've both been through and done for us. And again, your pictures there remind me of much happier times when we were out there doing our awareness raising. Yeah, I miss it a lot. Thank you so much, and I hope you're both keeping well. Take care. Right, okay, moving on. We're running a little bit late, but hopefully we should catch up. But it's all been really interesting, I'm sure you'll agree. Okay, so sorry, just before I do, a very quick reminder, please. Please do answer the questions. It would really help us. They're in the chat bar, and you can ask your own questions right at the end. So, next, I have a pleasure in introducing Fern Morris, who is a policy manager working on implementation of the opt-out organ and tissue donation system for Scotland. She has been at the Scottish Government for over 10 years, with experience in ministerial private office, alcohol policy, and most recently working on the development of the legislation for the opt-out system. Thank you, Fern.
Thank you, Neerja. Sorry, just taking myself off mute there. Thank you for inviting me here this evening. It's really good to be able to speak to you all about the opt-out system that we'll be moving to next month. From the 26th of March, we'll be moving to an opt-out system in Scotland. And I'm just going to tell you a bit about the approach that we've taken in developing the legislation, why we're introducing an opt-out system, and also what it means for you and what we're asking people to do as part of the law change. So the first thing to say is that we've tried to retain the element of gift that organ and tissue donation is. We know that it's a tremendous gift for people who receive an organ, and partly that's because for deceased donation, it comes at a time of great tragedy for families who are grieving the loss of their loved one, and to think of somebody else in that situation is a tremendous gift. And we've tried to really retain that aspect, and there's various safeguards in the legislation that I'll come on to talk about that seek to make sure that that element of gift is retained, and that the legislation reflects those conversations that take place with families at the end of life, and really seek to put the views of the potential donor first. And I know we've heard already to this evening about discussing wishes with family, and I'll come on to that in a moment about why that's so important. So I'll just, next slide. So why are we changing the law? So we know that there's really strong support for donation in Scotland. From surveys that we undertake, they show that around 90% of the population support donation, but that doesn't necessarily materialise in people going on the organ donor register and opting in. So there's about 50% of people opted in on the organ donor register, which is really great, and that's a result of a lot of work that's taken place with awareness raising campaigns and work of the peer educators that we've already heard about this evening, and a lot of work that's gone on to get that really great result of 50% of people on the register. But if we skip ahead to the next slide, we can see that there's a natural limit on the number of people who can become donors. So only 1% of people die in the circumstances where they can donate their organs, which means dying in intensive care. So there's a limit already on how many people will be in that situation. And all the time, there's about 500 people waiting on the transplant waiting list for an organ. So it's important that we do all that we can to try and improve that situation. And there's been an awful lot of work gone on from people working in the donation and transplantation, working on the people involved in it to try and improve things, and things have got better. The transplant waiting list is going down, but it's important that we look at everything that we can do to try and improve things. And one of the things is looking at how donation is authorised, and that's what's led us to introduce an opt-out system. So if we skip to the next slide, we'll look at what is involved in the new law. So the first thing to say is that under the new law, everybody has a choice, and donations, of course, are a very personal decision, and whether people want to donate or not is their choice. Under the new law, you can opt into donation as you can now. So going on the NHS organ donor register and opting into donation. You can opt out of donation, so say that you don't want to donate your organs. What will change with the new law is that if you do neither of those things, then if you die in circumstances where you could donate, then the assumption will be that you're willing to donate. But what's important is that we have checks in the system that make sure that people don't become donors if they wouldn't have wanted to. So it's written into the law that there has to be a discussion with the family to find out what the views of the donor were, and it's the views of the donor that the law is prioritising. So what was that person's views on donation? Would they have been unwilling to donate or not? To make sure that nobody becomes a donor if that would have been against their wishes. The other safeguard is around people who the law applies to. So there's certain groups of people who have the new law wouldn't apply to. Say if you're under 16, if you haven't lived in Scotland for more than 12 months, or if you wouldn't have capacity to understand the opt-out law. And what would happen there if a person in one of those groups dies in circumstances in which they can donate and they haven't already recorded their own decision, because they could record their own decision, but if they haven't, then it would be down to the family to decide whether they wanted to authorise donation or not. And finally, just to mention the tests that are part of the donation process. So the new law reflects the fact that these tests, so things such as blood tests and urine tests, to check the health of the organ and also to match them for somebody on the waiting list. The new law reflects that these are part of the process. So if you become a donor, these will be part of the process and they will happen. But just as the law requires discussion to take place with the family about donation, it also requires there be a discussion about these tests, so everybody knows that they're part of the process to facilitate donation. If we go on to the next slide, that's a very quick rundown on what's involved in the new law. But importantly, before the law can change, we need to make sure that people are aware of what the law is and what their choices are. And you might recognise some of these images from our advertising campaign that's running at the moment. And there'll be, you can see the logos there for Awaz FM. There's going to be a programme on there, I think, next week about the law change. And there's also, some of you might have also already received a leaflet through your on your door mat, explaining about what the law change is and what it means for people. And this is a leaflet that's going to every household in Scotland during February. So if you haven't got it yet, you will do in the next couple of weeks, to explain what the law means, what people's choices are. And it's really that message we're trying to get across, that everybody has a choice. We want people to think about donation, make a decision. And again, it's a personal decision whether you want to donate or not. Register your decision on the NHS organ donor register. And really importantly, share that decision with your relatives, because if they are in the position where a loved one is is sadly not able to recover and is potentially able to become a donor. We want families to know what their loved ones wanted, to give them the peace of mind of what their loved one wanted, and they will be asked as part of the new law what their loved one's views were. So it's really important, as well as making your decision and registering it, that you share it and have that conversation with your family. Thank you.
Thanks, Bern. I don't know where Nirja's gone. I think she's, hopefully she's not been disconnected. I think she'll be here somewhere. So thank you very much, Bern, for that update on the new change of law that's happening in Scotland, and I hope it's quite informative for all the listeners. So we'll just move on to the next speaker. Apologies, because I think Nirja's either has been taken off, or maybe she's had internet. Oh, Nirja? No, I think it was. Okay, so the next speaker, we'll just move on quite quickly, is Jen. Jen, well, I'll let Jen introduce herself then.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Bushra. My name's Jen Lumsden. I'm a living donor transplant coordinator, and I'm currently working with the organ donation team to raise awareness and improve equity of access to living kidney donation in Scotland. Thank you very much, Bushra.
Yeah, I'll just get your slide.
So I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you all about our living donor transplant programme. And in Scotland, we are very proud of our history of living donor transplant. We had the honour of having the first successful living donor transplant in the UK, was done in 1960. And is the next slide on, Bushra?
You can control your screen.
It doesn't seem to be.
Right, if you just let me know, I'll do it.
This is the newspaper headline from the Scotsman. The operation was done on a Sunday, and the medical doctor superintendent said they had a sporting chance of getting away with it, and the donor and recipient did very well. And actually, that was the start of just a huge transformation for all patients who are waiting on an organ transplant in the UK. And if you look last year, in 2018 to 2019, we had almost 300 kidney transplants done in Scotland alone, over 100 liver transplants, heart transplants, kidney pancreas, we do islet cell transplants. So we really have a remarkable story of transplantation in Scotland now. But as you've heard already, a kidney transplant for somebody who is approaching end-stage kidney disease is the best option if the person's suitable. The next slide, Bushra. Thank you. There are the options of hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis. And there are some people who wouldn't benefit from a transplant, but for those who would, we really very much promote a living donor transplant to be explored as the first option. The results from living donor transplantation, next slide, thank you, are much better than from a deceased donor. About 90% patient survival after 10 years with a living donor transplant, compared to 75% with patient survival at 10 years with a kidney from somebody who's died. So we know the results are very good. So that's one of the reasons that we really want to expand the pool of people who will talk about living donor transplants and try and access this best form of treatment. Next slide. It should be considered first, and I think it's sometimes not the easiest option to consider first, because people quite often just think about dialysis or going on the transplant list. But if we can change people's minds to talking about living donation first, that would be the best option. Next slide, thank you. And one of the things we can really do is try and raise awareness and increase the publicity, and really make it more normal for people when they hear about somebody who's got kidney failure, to think, well, actually, we know the best thing for them is getting a kidney from a family member or a friend. And increasingly since 2006, when the law changed, we have altruistic donors, somebody who gives a kidney to a complete stranger. And this has made an amazing difference to living donor transplant in the UK. So by increasing publicity and making people more aware about the benefits of living donor transplant, we can increase the numbers. When somebody approaches a transplant team, what we find very difficult for recipients is just, we say to them, go home and speak to your family and friends about living kidney donation. And we're looking at different ways of supporting people to do that, because it can be quite a shock for family members when they're asked about going through a major operation to give somebody a kidney if they haven't really thought about it before. Some people are very lucky if they mention the fact that they need a kidney, they have many family members coming forward or friends. And the important thing for the transplant team to do is make sure that nobody is put under any pressure, that everybody, the donors and recipients, know the risks and benefits. And we make sure that every turning, the safety of the donor is the absolute priority. So quite often have people come forward who say they want to give a kidney, but actually for one reason, a medical reason or a social reason or a psychological reason, they shouldn't go ahead with it. So we very, very much look at the safety of the donor. The matching process is actually very straightforward. We just do matching by blood group compatibility and tissue type. And nowadays, even if people aren't a match, then we just go into this. I won't go into it all here, but we'd have a kidney swapping scheme throughout the UK. So if you have a pair who don't match, then we swap. The donor from that pair would give to a recipient somewhere else in the UK, and their donor would give back to our recipient. And this can get more and more complicated. And this has facilitated so many more living donor transplants. When I first started as a transplant coordinator, you had to be compatible. Nowadays, that doesn't matter. I think one of the things about living donor transplant is we get to know the donor and recipient very well. They have a whole team who are there to look after the donor for the assessment. Every donor and recipient pair are seen by an independent assessor, because a living donor transplant has to be authorised by the Human Transplant Authority to make sure that nobody is being coerced and there's no money changing hands. So it's a big team effort. This is a picture of our transplant team here. And I have to say, as a transplant coordinator, one of the best parts of my job was going to see the donor and recipient the day after the operation, and the recipient who may not have been on dialysis, but kidney failure taking its toll on them, and suddenly feeling better immediately with a well-functioning kidney. And the donor, the operation nowadays is done by keyhole surgery, so the donor tends to be in hospital for 2 or 3 days at the most, and back to work after 6 to 8 weeks. So the recovery is much quicker than it used to be. I think when in the days gone by, when it was a bigger operation, then there was a lot more time involved. But the surgery has moved on, and it really does make such a difference to that person's life. And we've looked very closely at the impact it's had on the donor for the follow-up. And we know from the results which are collected by NHS Blood and Transplant that the longer term living donation, the donors are very carefully monitored once a year for their own kidney function. And this is just a picture of some donors and recipients. I'm sure you can't actually tell who's a donor and who's recipient, but they are all, living, recipients are living full lives without having to be on dialysis, and the donors have the joy of seeing what a precious gift they've made. So that's a speak through living kidney donation. I'm happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
I think you need to mute yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My video. Thank you so much for that. Oh, I'm seeing somebody's video here. Is it that? Jen, thank you so much, and I apologise. I had a technical glitch and I just disappeared. But I know you were introduced, so thank you so much for that. A fantastic overview, and really bringing to life Pam and Sam's story in what happens behind the scenes. Really much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before we
Yes,
start,
sure.
could I know everybody's on mute, but there's some certain people when they join, they're not on mute and I can't mute them. There's somebody called Rajinder Singh that's joined. Could you please just put yourself on mute? And somebody called Dami that was on as well. I can't seem to mute you. If you could just mute yourselves, it just, you know, for when the speakers are speaking, there's no interference.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, that's odd, isn't it, that we can't mute?
I know. Sorry. Thank you.
Right. Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We're getting through, and there will be opportunity to ask questions at the end. So I'd now like to introduce you to Dr. Radha Sundaram, who is a consultant in intensive care and anaesthetics at the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Paisley. Having qualified in India, she did a postgraduate medical, anaesthetic and intensive care training in Liverpool, Oxford and Glasgow. She's the regional advisor for training in intensive care medicine for the west of Scotland and is also a clinical lead for organ donation in Scotland to promote awareness amongst BAME communities. Over the last 5 years, Radha has worked with NHS Blood and Transplant, Scottish Government and ourselves, Kidney Research UK, to improve education and awareness around organ donation in our multi-ethnic communities. Her interests in the area of organ donation include improving donation after circulatory deaths and introducing a tool to prompt consideration of organ donation at the end of life in intensive care units. Thank you, Radha.
Thank you, Neerja and Bushra. As always, it's a great pleasure to speak at the webinars organised by Kidney Research UK and Scottish Government. So thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Radha. I'm a consultant in intensive care, and most of the time my job involves saving lives. But in a very small proportion of patients, we're unable to achieve that. But we then have the powerful opportunity to actually respect the wishes of the patient who's dying and save 7 other lives, if that was their wish in health. I'm going to just tell you all about how we navigate this very sort of important journey and how much of a privilege it is for us as intensive care consultants to be a part of that journey. This is Gordon. He was the poster boy for the NHSBT organ donation campaign for very long. And Gordon, as a 13-year-old, received a heart transplant. He now is the proud father of a child and he owns a business. And as he clearly says, we need everybody. We need the white ones, the brown ones, we need the tall ones, we need the small ones, we need everyone. Over the last few years, despite all our efforts, there's always a transplant waiting list. And as you can see from the slide, in 2018-2019, there were a number of patients that were waiting for a transplant, despite the fact that 133, just going to minimize this because I can't. Bushra, can I just have the last slide, please? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. I think it's
not at all. Despite the generosity of 98 families, we then were able to proceed with 333 transplant. But as you can see, that the red line on the top, which is the transplant waiting list, still has a huge gap. And even though we did 333 transplants, we still had 579 people on the transplant waiting list. Next slide, please. 3 people die each day waiting for a transplant. And the way modern medicine has evolved means that each of us is 5 times more likely to need a transplant than become a donor. As BAME patients, we are 3 times more likely than our Caucasian counterparts to need a transplant. And as it has been explained earlier on in this webinar, it's because of the prevalence of diabetes and hypertension amongst the South Asians. But unfortunately, our families are also 3 times more likely to refuse to proceed with donation. 1 donor saves up to 7 lives. And although about 500,000 people die each year in the UK, only 1% will be in a position to donate. And that is because in order for donation to proceed, the patient needs to be on a ventilator in the emergency department or in intensive care. And we should have reached a point of futility where continuing life-saving care is futile for that patient. Next slide, please. In a country the size of the UK, if you take the statistics from 2018-2019, we have about 600,000 deaths, of those, only 290,000 deaths actually occur in a hospital. So we then have 6,991 potential organ donors. Next slide, please. And then the number of eligible donors, because the donors have to be of a certain age for certain donations, and have to have some, cannot have many comorbidities. There are only 5,815 eligible donors. Next slide, please. And we then approach 3,245 families, and we only have 2,000 saying yes. And actually then the number of donors, even if all those people said yes, comes down to 1,600. So less than 1% of patients are actually in a position where they can proceed to donation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And these lives are saved because of the concerted efforts of a number of agencies. At the center of this is society. Society actually in the UK wishes for transplants to proceed. If you do a sort of market survey or a market poll of people and ask them if they are willing to accept a transplant, 95% of Scottish public are willing to accept a transplant. If you then ask them whether they would donate their organs, well over 90% actually would donate their organs as well. But if you look at the organ donor register just now, about 50% of our Scottish public have actually registered to donate. And that is because death is, none of us actually want to contemplate our death, and death's quite abstract for most of us. It's in the future. And it's not because we don't want to save lives, but actually to convert the intent to action, to actually go and register our donation decision is just something that we don't get around to doing. These lives are also saved by the work of NHSBT, which is the overarching organization that coordinates donation and transplantation, the vast array of primary care doctors, general practitioners who look after patients before their transplant and after their transplant, the transplant units that proceed with the operations and look after the patients, and the intensive care units, where we have the honor and privilege to actually respect the dying wish of our patients and, with the assent of their families, proceed with donation. Currently, the way we register our wish is to register on the organ donation website. We can either do this when we're registering for a driving license or when we're registering at the GP. But the law is changing, and the law is changing on the 26th of March, 2021. And as Fern clearly pointed out, what the law does is it makes it a soft opt-out. Next slide, please. What the law does is it reframes the conversations that ICU doctors have with patients' relatives. Up until now, we ask families if they know whether their relative had expressed a wish to donate. The law now empowers us to ask the nearest relatives and friends if they had a reason to object to donation. And this subtle reframing of the language is actually quite powerful. If you take the example of Wales, so family assent and donations were far less before the law changed in 2015, and family authorization of family consent in Wales has gone up from 49% to over 70% just with the changing of the law to opt out. Next slide, please. As intensive care doctors, I'd like to reassure you that we always do what's the best interest of the patients, and our attempts and endeavors are always to save lives. But there comes a point when we reach futility, when our curative care is not going to return meaningful recovery to the patient and their condition is unsurvivable. We then have to focus on the comfort and dignity of the patient, and that focus then becomes about palliation. But we do have an opportunity at this stage to approach their families and seek their assent about organ donation. Next slide, please. What is death? Death is a biological definition, and there are various definitions in all our scriptures, but to all doctors, nurses, and medical teams, death entails the irreversible loss of those essential characteristics which are necessary to the existence of a living human person. So the definition of death is the irreversible loss of the capacity for consciousness combined with an irreversible loss of the capacity to breathe. Next slide, please. So donation after death can happen after brainstem death, or donation by neurological criteria, or donation after circulatory death. Thankfully, in the UK, we have a very robust legal and ethical framework, and our learned societies like the UK Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, the General Medical Council, our regulatory agency, all tell us that where donation is likely to be a possibility, full consideration should be given to the matter when caring for a patient. And we are supported legally by approaching families to discuss donation. Deceased donation proceeds only after futility discussions are reached and death happens. The donations do not occur before death actually happens. But before all this, we have to make sure that we're doing the right thing by the patient. So most intensive care units in Scotland have a tool that they use called a comfort tool. We make sure that there's a consensus decision regarding futility. And this consensus decision has to have all doctors and nurses agreeing. Even if there is one dissenting voice, we tend to then continue with the treatment. We then consider organ donation at every end-of-life conversation. We make sure that our medical documentation is complete, and we have an end-of-life document and a do not resuscitate document. We make sure that the family have privacy, that we sometimes have to wait for family to come. We ask about the religious and spiritual needs of our family, because we realize that death and death rituals are very culturally sensitive, and all our teams are now educated and informed about how to approach families in our multi-ethnic, diverse society. Next slide, please. I would like to reassure you that doctors will always do their best to save the lives of patients. But unfortunately, as I explained, sometimes due to a serious accident or an unsurvivable brain hemorrhage or stroke, we have to accept futility. We then approach the family along with the specialist nurse for organ donation. These nurses are embedded within our team and they work very closely with us. The family will be asked for consent regardless of whether the patient is on the organ donor register. However, if the patient is on the organ donor register, what we have observed is that the family are then empowered to make the right decision. At a time when they're engulfed with grief, if they knew that their dying relative would have liked to donate, it makes it easier for them to say yes. The specialist nurse then guides the family through the process. We do a lot of tests, a lot of personal information about the patient is sought by the specialist nurse. GPs are contacted, medical records are perused, and the patients will be cared for by the ICU team until the time for donation happens. They are not moved out of ICU. Care is not changed in any way. The same team of doctors and ICU nurses will continue to look after the patient. We then have to wait for the arrival of the regional retrieval teams before we actually can take the patient to theatre. We encourage the family to stay with the patient until it's time to go to theatre. We offer them spiritual and religious help, and we're getting better even with COVID restrictions to actually support our families through these difficult times. The family are then given the opportunity to either stay or go once the patient goes to theatre, but most often the family choose to go away when the patient goes to the operating theatre. The patient is looked after by an anaesthetic and a surgical team. Despite the fact that the patient is actually either brain dead or have reached asystole, which is that their heart has stopped beating, we treat the patient with respect and dignity. And an anaesthetic, a very senior anaesthetist, is the one who manages the patient and makes sure that the conditions are suitable for the operation. All religious considerations are adhered to, and the family can stay around to say goodbye to the patient. We then keep in touch with our families that have been so heroic in their generosity and their dignity at a time of grief, at a time when their loved one is actually dying. These families find it in their hearts to not help themselves, but help 7 other people who they may never know. We try to build legacies and keepsakes, and we do celebrate them by giving them the Order of St. John's Cross. And every year, at least pre-COVID, we would have honouring ceremonies either in the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery or in Holyrood. Next slide, please. My appeal to you is that actually saying yes to donation is community action. Just like we are all able to wear masks and and keep our distance and follow all the COVID regulations, not just to save ourselves, but to save our other members of society. If we could say yes and share that information with our loved ones, we can save up to 7 lives. We could give sight to a couple and transform a few others' lives by tissue donation as well. Next slide, please. As I said, 95% of our public actually support donation. We wouldn't be here actually discussing a law change and implementing a law change if society, we didn't have the unwavering support of society and all the political parties. However, in order for us to make sure that our decision to donate is tangible, is actually visible, it's important that we still register on the organ donor website, and we then share that information with our families so that they are empowered to make that decision at a time when they're engulfed by grief. Next slide, please. That's it. Thank you very much. And I will take questions like the others at the end of the session.
Thank you so much once again, Radha. And for those of you who have, I'll put my video on in a moment. For those of you who have been on this journey of webinars, you'll know that Radha has been really focused on our work here, helping us support this whilst being absolutely on that front line. So really much appreciated for illuminating that side of things, Radha. So now you're about to hear from a donor family, actually. So the other side of what Radha's been talking about and what it really is like. So I'm absolutely privileged and honoured to welcome Bobby Mudhar. Bobby is the founder of the Mandeep Mudhar Memorial Foundation, MMMF, which was awarded the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service, which is the MBE, effectively, for voluntary groups. It's the highest award given to local volunteer groups across the UK. Founded in 2001 in memory of Bobby's brother, the MMMF raises awareness for organ donation within Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities through numerous events, including an annual charity football tournament. Bobby Mudhar, the chair of the foundation and brother of Mandeep Mudhar, whose organs were donated by the family after his sudden and tragic death, says, "One of the core elements of the Sikh faith is selfless service, helping others, known as seva. At the time of making our decision to donate, we were comforted knowing that we would be able to help others through this selfless act of donation. For us, it was the ultimate act of seva, and not only was it a human decision to donate, but the values of Sikhism supported this. Furthermore, it helps us to deal with the tragedy of losing Mandeep in a positive way. Since 2001, our family ethos has been positivity out of tragedy, and it is the basis of the foundation we set up in Mandeep's memory and how we promote awareness around organ donation." Thank you, Bobby. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nirja. I just want to take the opportunity to thank Nirja and Bushra for providing me this opportunity, really, to share our family story. And thank you for all the great work that yourself and all the contributors today are doing in the field of organ donation awareness. I guess, so I want to give you a bit of a context and kind of, I guess, lead into why we actually made the decision to donate. And the fact that I'm so happy to always talk about my brother and our situation is because we made the decision to donate. It's the best decision that we ever made as a family, and the right decision, and it's something that we never regretted. And as Nirja pointed to earlier, and as you can see from the slide, our family ethos is positivity out of tragedy, because in such a tragic circumstance, we as a family made a decision to donate, and it really helped us through. And it's one of the reasons why I'm able to talk quite candidly about our experience and why we donated. Looking at the stats that have gone so far, it's easy to understand why there's a need for organ donation within the South Asian community. There's also understanding that there's not enough people from the South Asian community on the donor list, and equally, the stats tell the story. That they are the facts. So a lot of work goes into kind of understanding why people don't donate. But I think I'd like to share our story as to why we did donate and why, you know, it was a decision that's provided us with extreme comfort. So if I just give you a bit of background, my brother passed away in 2001 on New Year's Day. He was involved, well, that's when he had the accident. He was a rear seat passenger in a car that was involved in an accident on January the 1st, 2001. And he subsequently passed away 7 days later on the 7th of January. So he was the youngest of the siblings, 19 years old, just started university. Now we get a knock on the door at 5 o'clock in the morning from a police officer saying that you're needed at Luton and Dunstable Hospital. This has happened. It's kind of your worst ever nightmare. So I and the family went to the hospital, and upon arrival at the hospital, we were told that my brother's injuries were quite severe, and that straight off the back that he would not be able to see out of his right eye. Now that was a shock straight away. It's bad enough finding out that your brother's been involved in an accident. And I asked a question, and this is relevant because it kind of puts into context how we came about making the decision to donate. So I asked the kind of doctors at that time, I said, well, is there any possibility of an eye donation, an eye transplant? Quite naively. And they actually said to me, well, it's more complicated than you actually think, but also my brother's injuries to the eye were so severe that no kind of transplant would have kind of rectified his eyesight or been of any use. So, straight away, we're dealing kind of with blows. But I mean, okay, we accepted that, and our main aim was to get my brother stable. And he actually left the vehicle by head first through the back window, so he sustained some serious head injuries. And it was within a few hours, it was quite clear that he needed to be transferred somewhere else for more specialist treatment. And he was sent to the Royal Free Hospital in London. So that's where the family went to obviously be with him. The family, all his friends, my friends, we kind of really camped out at the Royal Free for about 7 days. Very stressful situation. You have my parents there, who their youngest child. We're all going through so much trauma ourselves. It was quite apparent towards the end of the week that my brother's injuries were so severe that he would not really pull through. And it was towards the end of the week that we were approached by a transplant coordinator. And I always mention this whenever I talk about my brother. I always say that is an amazing role, but such a difficult job to approach a family and kind of sound the family out on whether we'd actually considered organ donation. Which, to be honest, there's a couple of things here. One, I kind of appreciated the fact that somebody made the approach. And kind of how difficult that job was. But I also was kind of like, can we just have some time to think and process this as well? However, one thing that really helped us in that situation is that my brother and my sister Kiran had already had a conversation previously about organ donation. My brother did say to her that, should anything happen, then I'm happy to donate my organs. And this is the thing that, as a foundation, we try and promote. We try and promote the conversation within South Asian families of organ donation. We'll happily talk about all types of insurance, life insurance, phone insurance, and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to, what you want to do with your organs, it's kind of like still a taboo subject. So that really helped us. And I also sought counsel from family elders and people kind of more learned about the Sikh faith than myself, in terms of, because we'd never known a Sikh family, a Punjabi family that had ever donated. Obviously, we've never been in this situation before. I'd like to think that we're a religious family of sorts, and kind of we want to know that we're doing right by our faith as well. However, the underpinning and I guess underlining thing to everything in our decision making was that this was going to be a human decision. Now, another thing that came into play was the fact that upon arriving at hospital, when we first found out about my brother's injuries, we were asking for something. We were asking for a donation, you know, an eye transplant. And so that factored into our kind of decision making and our discussions as to if we're willing to ask, then, you know, we should be kind of, you know, open to donating as well. And we were really looking for something positive to come out of this, because it was quite evident towards the end of the week that my brother wouldn't make it. We had the last stem test, and the doctor turned to us and he said, well, your brother's not and your son's not going to make a recovery here. And it's at that point where I always point to this as well, that my parents were my absolute heroes, and literally my dad turned around and said, well, the spirit's gone out of the body now. The body is just a shell, as we believe in Sikhi, and that's take whatever you need, you know, take whatever you need to kind of help other people. And I was like, wow, this is your youngest son, you know, you're literally kind of giving everything away of your son, and at this kind of moment in time, you're my absolute hero. How can you even just kind of say that? And the question I asked was, because we have a ceremonial wash the day before the funeral, I wanted to make sure that the washing of the body wasn't too, I guess, too much of a challenge to the family members. You know, it wasn't going to be too traumatic. So I was kind of, I've only heard kind of, I guess, horrific stories about organ donation, how it's done, and very limited in my knowledge at that time as to what the process was. So I asked questions, just like we asked questions to the transplant coordinator. We asked a lot of questions, and this is what we try and encourage through the foundation: is ask questions, you know, and then you can make a decision based on what you know. And then I asked all the questions. I actually asked the doctor what actually happens, you know, how is the body, how are the organs taken out of the body, what's done afterwards, how are the staples put into the skin, is it going to be covered? And I also asked, I didn't want it to be too traumatic, so we didn't want to take too much off the body that my father, myself, and other family members couldn't wash the body. So I asked, what are the key organs that would be useful to anybody? And the doctor turned around and he kind of said, well, brother's only 19 years old, you know, his heart is extremely healthy, his kidneys are healthy. Those three organs themselves would be of massive value to whoever gets them. And again, we kind of transported back to when we first came to hospital and we were asking for something. And, you know, we could easily be in a situation where we needed a heart and a kidney, and regardless of who it was, we would have grabbed it with both hands. So we kind of made a family decision as to donate the heart and 2 kidneys. And you know, the staff at the Royal Free were great. I even got to speak to the transplant surgeons who have a finite amount of time to get the organs out. So I literally, when we turned the machines off, I went into the operating theatre just outside the doors, as Mandeep went in and the transplant surgeons did what they needed to do. So they're very kind of accommodating, and they answered a lot of the questions. And, you know, my mind was put at rest in terms of how the body would be plastered after the kind of surgery. Now, you know, I talk about this, say quite candidly and with great joy, because it's one of those decisions that has not only provided a lot of comfort, but it was such a human decision, the right thing to do. Now, my brother's heart, 20 years on, is still functioning well. In the individual who received it, that person wrote us a letter thanking us for it. And for us, it was, my parents, it wasn't so much the kind of thanks or kind of, you know, a letter. It was more that we did something to help somebody else. All part of Seva, part of Sikhi, you know, the right thing. It was the right thing to do. We couldn't ask ourselves a question. We couldn't answer the question as to why we wouldn't do it. We simply couldn't come up with an answer, because it is the right thing to do, in our opinion. It's the 2 kidneys. 1 kidney went to a young lady, and the other kidney also went to a teenager, I believe, and both kidneys unfortunately lasted about five years with the recipients before they were rejected because of other health issues. But that's 5 years of more experiences. That's 5 years of, you know, birthday parties, weddings, spending time with loved ones, more experiences and fun times. You know, the person who has the heart is still functioning well and has had like near enough 20 years of kind of experiences. And that's what you're giving. You're giving somebody the opportunity to prolong their life, to have those experiences. I know, and I revert back to what I said earlier, if we were in that situation, we'd grab the organs with both hands from whoever, just to spend, you know, literally just to spend 2 minutes with my brother, or give him a hug. You know, that's all I'd want. And that's like just, you know, compared to, you know, 5 years and 20 years. So that's what you're giving. And listening to the stats and what's gone on before, now as a South Asian community, we need to look into ourselves and say, look, you know, either we do something about not getting to the stage where we need an organ, but also when we're at that stage, we're more likely to be at that stage where we need an organ. And so what are we going to do? Let us have this conversation. And, you know, people might turn around and say, actually, it's not for us. Okay, however, it's best to do that once you've had a conversation, once you ask questions. And that's why the peer educators, everyone here on this webinar is amazing at what they do, reaching out to communities. And through the foundation, we do a lot of grassroots work where we go to festivals, religious events and gurdwaras and talk about our story, no matter how kind of tragic it is. And, you know, the older I get, the more emotional I get when I talk about the story. However, at the same time, I can't see anything other than positivity out of tragedy, and talk about how happy I am that and we are as a family, that we not only honoured my brother's wishes, but we were able to help somebody, just like we needed help at the time. So from that perspective, I mean, that was kind of really our reasoning behind making the decision to donate. And don't get me wrong, we had some challenges. We had some family members and elders who were kind of, oh, this isn't done in Sikhi and never heard about this before. I need to kind of reach out to somebody else who's more learned than me to find out. Yes, ultimately the decision is yours as a family. What helped us was that my brother had that conversation with my sister, and that really provided us with some comfort. My mother and late father, I guess what got them through their later years is the fact knowing that they were able to do something positive in my brother's passing. And the tournament keeps his legacy alive. We have, you know, football teams coming from all over the country, all ages, and we use that as a vehicle to promote the importance of organ donation and have that conversation. And it's extremely important as a South Asian community that we have those conversations and really promote that narrative. And so really, I guess that's our story as family. It's a decision, best decision, you know, we've ever made, something that we've never regretted. And ultimately, as you see, it's a human decision. Unfortunately, I guess the only drawback is my two daughters there who haven't got to see, well, didn't get to see their uncle. They're lifelong West Ham fans now, because that was my brother's football team, so they'll probably hate me for that later on in life. But you know, it's about celebrating life, and that's what we're doing through the tournament and what I'm doing here today and sharing our story. So thank you again, Neeraj and Bushra, for allowing me the opportunity to share the story. But also thank you to everybody else that's on this webinar. You know, we've come across each other a few times. Sam and Pam especially, and having you guys on here really puts into context the reason for receiving and how important that is, but also how to donate. And just having you on this webinar helps me to gives me the confidence and I guess the comfort to share our story. And it's a strange one. People say to me, well, don't you ever cry or you never sad? Oh, yeah, you are. But you know, ultimately, Chardi Kala is a saying in Sikhi. It's about moving forward. It's about being positive, and you know, it's about being practical as well. And in a time like that, my father was very practical in terms of what he said, but he also said it out of love, and he said it out of seva. And I think, you know, they're core elements, and there are similar elements in other faiths. Key takeaway really I want to leave you guys with is let's have that discussion, and that's paramount to any decision to be made, to have that discussion. So thank you again for letting me share that story, Neerja, and I hope the lighting is okay.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And actually, you've just ended it just how it should be, in terms of saying that, let's have that discussion. And brave stories like yours, how you've shared something that's affected your family for 20 years, and how you've made sure your brother's legacy continues, I'm sure will promote many discussions. So thank you so much again for coming on to our webinar. I know you've had a really tough couple of weeks doing something else, but this is really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I have great pleasure to introduce Mrs. Kamaljeet Kaur, Sevadar or volunteer from Central Gurdwara Singh Sabha, Glasgow. She's been a volunteer there for the past 10 years. She organises and facilitates Gurdwara tours for schools as well as for other organisations. Kamaljeet has been volunteering also as a Punjabi language teacher for the past 8 years. She's married with 2 teenage daughters and professionally has worked in the third sector for the last 10 years, with her current role being Climate Change Development Officer. Now, that's a discussion for another day. I look forward to that. Thank you. Over to you, Kamaljeet.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and good evening, everyone. I'm just going to take myself off video while I do this. Okay, and just adjust my screen so I can see the slides. Okay.
Cam, if you, sorry, I was going to say, if you want to keep your screen on, it'll be fine as well, because I can work the slides around.
Okay, it's okay. That's fine. Don't worry. I'll have to take everything myself. So first of all, I just wanted to say, just hearing everyone's personal stories, it's been so inspiring and humbling to hear Satnam Singh and Parmjeet Kaur, and then obviously Bobby Baji just there at the end. And honestly, I think that just kind of sums up everything, but I will go through this presentation that, you know, organ donation is a big part of how you can do your seva in terms of the Sikhi faith. So I'm just going to get started. If you could just go, thank you very much. Okay, just a bit of background on the Sikh faith. So the Sikh faith was founded 552 years ago in the region of Punjab. It is the 5th largest religion in the world, so it's a fairly new religion. We believe there's only one God and there is no gender, and God is eternal. Sikhi is a practical faith and seen as a way of life. The main virtue is simplicity and love to all. Sikhi is a universal faith. Currently, there are 20 million Sikhs around the world, with 500,000 in Britain. Guru Nanak Dev Ji was the first Guru of the Sikhs, and he was the founder of the Sikh faith. There are 11 Gurus of the Sikh faith, so 10 were in body form. Guru means teacher and Sikh means learner. The 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, appointed the Holy Scriptures, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, as their successor. Now, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji to us is not just a holy book, it's the embodiment of the 10 Gurus. It's their souls, the spirits and their teachings. So we treat it like royalty. So this is our final and sovereign Guru. It contains 1,430 angs. Now, angs means bodies or body parts or limbs. Again, so we don't refer to it as having pages, because to that is our eternal Guru. Next, please. The Khalsa was created in 1699 by Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So Khalsa means the Sikh army. Sikh males and females who have taken Amrit, been initiated, always wear the articles of faith, which are known as the 5 Ks. Now, there's a practical use to the 5 Ks as well as a spiritual use. So I'm not going to touch on that. I'm just going to go through what they are. So we have Ges, which is uncut hair, Kanga, a wooden comb, Kada, an iron bangle, Kirpan, a sword, and a kashera, which are cotton shorts. Now, these are worn by males and females that have taken Amrit. Now, although the dastar, which is a turban, isn't mentioned here, it is also seen as an essential part which is worn to protect the gaze. Next, please. Thank you. There are 3 key principles of Sikhi: Naam Japna, remembering God; Kirta Karna, honest living; and Vandge Shakana, sharing with others. Next, please. Thank you. Now, if we think of a bird enable for them to live and fulfill their purpose to fly, they've got to have 2 wings. So just like that, being a Sikh, you've got to have 2 strong wings, which are made of Seva and Simran. Now, Seva is selfless service, which we'll talk about in the next slide, and Simran is the remembrance of God. Thank you. Seva, selfless service. What do we mean by selfless service? So this is serving those that need, and you're serving regardless of faith, gender, or age. So serving those that need help from you, and you shouldn't look at where they come from or their background. Now, in our teachings, it's mentioned time and time again of how you can do this selfless service, how you can serve others. So we have tan, which is body, physically. We have man, which is through the mind, mentally, which we have tan, which is materialistically how you can help people, and that is through your wealth. Next, please. Now, the biggest role models that we as Sikhs can look at is our gurus. So if we look at Guru Harkrishan Sahib Ji, they were our 8th guru, and they were the youngest guru. They gave their life and their body in helping sufferers during a smallpox epidemic in Delhi. So it's entirely consistent with their spirit of service that we consider donating organs after death to give life and hope to others. When we look at the example of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, the 9th guru, they sacrificed their life for the Hindu faith. So they were beheaded. And again, they didn't look to see what religion needed helping. They just stood forward and they helped. And finally, I think this is my final slide. Finally, I just want to say, oh, there's another one. Sorry. Okay. So these are just some teachings from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, just a few lines. So it says, the true path to God lies in the service of our fellow beings. Pilgrimages, penances, and ritual giving in themselves carry no weight, not even that of a grain of mustard seed. So this is from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, our teachings. So as far as I can see, now this is my personal opinion on the Sikh faith, I have not come across anything where it says there's an objection to organ donation, and it is very much an individual's choice. My own personal journey in terms of organ donation, I signed up for organ donation 15 years ago, and I didn't really speak about it with my family. And a few years ago, I told them of my desire to have my organs donated if I was to pass. And it didn't really go down quite so well in terms of my daughters were quite, so if we can just stop the screen sharing, Bushra, thank you. So my daughters were quite hesitant, and they weren't, you know, they couldn't understand why I'd want to do something like that. So I think it's very important, and I did explain then that, look, we are in the Sikh faith, and doing seva of doing organs is the biggest seva that you can do, I think, in my eyes, because Maharaj tells us, our teachings tell us that this body is a vessel, and it's only here for a short period of time, and it's here for our soul to travel through this time. But when we pass, when we die, it's going to turn into ashes and dust. It's not going to serve any purpose. So if you can leave this world by donating to other people, giving them a better life, giving them a better chance, there's no better thing that I feel, seva, that you can do, use physically using your body. Personally, my own Chachi Ji, so my aunt, she passed away about 6 years ago. And actually Auntie Chaudhary, she signed her up for organ donation when she was alive. And when she passed, she passed in Birmingham, but she lived in Glasgow, and we travelled down, and the consultants came in to speak to my uncle and my cousins, and I was also in with them because they wanted my view on the Sikh faith of what I thought, because my Chachi was a Gursikh, she was a practicing Sikh. And my uncle did say, look, you know, your mum, he said to my cousins, your mum was registered as an organ donation, but they had no idea that their mum had wanted this, that this was her wish. And I remember being there, and there was a bit of kind of disagreement within the family. And then my cousins did look at me and they said, well, you know, you follow the faith like my mum did. What do you think? Is this the right thing to do? And I said, absolutely. I said, first of all, it was her wish to do it. And I said, you know, there's no bigger seva that she can do now that she's passed than to pass on her organs. So I really do think from everyone speaking today, there's a clear message that discussions need to be had in the family about your wish to organ donate, whether you wish to or don't wish to, either way, but I think it really needs to be clear. And in terms of if you are a practicing Sikh or you're in the Sikh faith or you believe in the Sikh faith, I personally don't think there's anything in there that should stop you from being an organ donator. And my daughter, who's now 17, last year when she applied for a provisional license, she signed up to be organ donator as well. So again, you know, speak with your children, speak with the elders, speak with your family. You know, we know when we're born, one thing that we're certain is death. We all know that. So if we can prepare our families and our loved ones and know what our wishes are, I think it's better to do that now than them having that conversation later on when you've passed. Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, Kamaljeet, thank you so much for that. No, amazing, a lovely overview of Sikhi for those of our participants who did not know, but what a wonderful inspirational note to finish on. And just think, you know, you've been a role model. You are a follower of Sikhi. You researched it. You signed up. You told your family, and you managed to persuade your Jashiji's family. What a difference you've already made, and wonderful to see that your daughter's following your footsteps as well. Thank you so much for that. Now, before I know we are running behind of time. No, thank you for making the time. Before I hand over to Trishna, is there any questions for any of our speakers, please? You can take yourself off mute, come on video. If you'd rather leave a message in the chat bar, that's fine. I can't see any hands. Anyone coming on? Any questions at all for any of our speakers? Dr. Singh?
Can I ask Satnam Singh Kangji? Just really wanted to know if he ever went to India before his operations.
Oh yeah,
trouble did he have about dialysis?
ਮੇਰੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਮੈਂ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਵੀ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਮੇਰੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਵੇਚਦੇ ਪਏ ਸੀ ਆਪਦੀ
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਸੋ ਮੇਰਾ ਜਾਣਾ ਹੋਣਾ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 4 ਦਫਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ
ਕੀ ਮੁਸ਼ਕਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ
ਮੁਸ਼ਕਲਾਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ ਮੁਸ਼ਕਲਾਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਮੈਂ ਕੱਢ ਲਈਆਂ ਸੀ ਇੱਕ ਵੈਬਸਾਈਟ ਆ globaldialysis.com
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਾ ਦਿਓ ਵੀ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਉਸ ਲੋਕੈਲਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਡਾਇਲਿਸਿਸ ਸੈਂਟਰਸ ਆ ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਉਹ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਦਿੰਦੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਦਿੰਦੀ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਮਸ਼ੀਨ ਉਹ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਪਏ ਆ ਕਿਹੜੇ ਡਾਇਲਾਈਜ਼ਰਸ ਉਹ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਪਏ ਆ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਸੋ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਵਰਕਆਊਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਸਮਾਨ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਚੱਕਣਾ ਮੈਂ ਨਾਲ
ਤੇ ਘਰੋਂ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਕੁ ਦੂਰ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ
ਘਰੋਂ ਏਦਾਂ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ 24 ਕਿਲੋਮੀਟਰ ਦੀ ਰੇਂਜ ਰੱਖੀ ਸੀ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਕਿਉਂ 24 ਘੰਟੇ ਵਿੱਚ 45 ਮਿੰਟ ਜਾਣ ਦੇ 45 ਆਉਣ ਦੇ ਫਿਰ ਕਿਉਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਘਰ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਮੇਰੀ ਬੱਸ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀ ਸੋ ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਏਦਾਂ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਡਰਾਈਵਰ ਸਾਡਾ
ਵਗੈਰਾ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ ਕਦੀ ਉੱਥੇ
ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੀ ਨਾਲ ਸੀ ਪੂਰੇ ਟ੍ਰੇਨਿੰਗ ਲਈ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਘਰੇ ਡਾਇਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਨਰਸ ਹੋਣੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਲਈ ਸੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਸ਼ੀਨ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਧੋਣੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਮਾਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਮਾਨ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਨਾਲ
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਜੀ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਸੈਮ
just not a question just a comment ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਤੇ ਬੁਸ਼ਰਾ ਬਾਰ-ਬਾਰ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ 9 ਲਾਈਫ ਸੇਵ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਰਾਧਾ ਜੀ 7 ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਸੋ ਇੱਕ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਕਰ ਲਓ ਜਾਂ 7 ਕਹਿ ਦਿਓ ਜਾਂ 9 ਕਹਿ ਦਿਓ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਕੰਫਿਊਜ਼ ਕਰਦਾ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ
Yeah, sorry Dr. Singh, yes we will clarify that for you but yeah I think it is 9 that's
fine
it was
ਰਾਧਾ ਨੂੰ ਕੋ ਚੇਂਜ ਕਰ ਲੈ 9 ਕਰ ਲੈ ਰਾਧਾ ਨੂੰ ਕੋ
Yeah, but yeah, we'll let you know at the next webinar if it's any different. Thank you for that, Dr. Singh. Now, Uncle Chaudhary, I think, had a question.
Yeah, Mr.
It's not a question, but Nirja, we've been trying to speak to Kam's uncle for some time. Now, Kam, I spoke to Kamaljeet as well some time back, I think a few months back. And I'm sure she can convince her cousins and bring that in knowledge for you, so that she can put her version for the future, so that people can know.
That would be a very powerful story.
That's my request to Kamaljeet, as well as so you have a direct contact with her now.
She tried her best, I think.
I did. And you know, I think this is still within our community. It's still an issue that's not spoken about. So for some reason, my uncle is okay with it, but see, my cousins, the daughters, the youngest daughter, really, she's really still struggling years on. And she's still not comfortable sharing her mum's story with the wider community. Now, I've got another cousin on my mum's side, and my cousin who had kidney failure, and then his brother, my other cousin, donated his kidney. I even spoke to them and saying, look, we're doing a webinar. Would you be comfortable sharing your story? But none of them got back to me.
No.
And I think
keep trying, Ania,
I will keep trying. Don't worry, Uncle. I will.
Sorry, that came to my mind, and because she saved 9 lives in Birmingham, so it was a very big thing.
Amazing.
And that will give a big boost to the community, because we are lacking people donating the organs. So this will help the whole cause. And that's why we're insisting on that. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Uncle Chaudhry. Any other burning questions? Otherwise, as Bush has put on in the chat bar, you can email her. And yes, sorry, was that Kranti?
Yeah, Kranti, and also Kiran Sangera. She's got.
Okay. Yeah, Kranti, go ahead.
Right, just a question, an ethical one. I have registered, I've told my family. Now, what if by any chance my family don't, well, maybe the family of the person who signed don't know about it, and then they refuse, but I have signed. Do you check the register online and say, but yeah, Kranti signed up, why are you objecting, and what happens then?
Sure. Yes, Radha? Is that Radha?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
You're absolutely right. So before we approach the family, we actually check the organ donor register. And actually, if the patient's already registered a wish, sometimes people register a couple of times, you know, because they've renewed their license or been to the GP. We also look at how recent their last registration is, and we share that information with their family, because their family may not be aware at all. It is a soft opt-out, and the decision not to proceed if the family are completely against donation is because we realize that the family are the survivors of that grief, and doctors make that sort of decision. However, we do explain to them that in health, their family member expressed a wish to donate, and we have enough evidence and proof that they did. And it would actually be, although it has never been challenged in court, it would be unlawful to not proceed with their wishes, because if you give consent to an operation in health, your family members can't say you can't have that operation. And so, but we do it with a lot of sensitivity, because we do realize that families are so grief struck, but we do make that effort before we approach the families.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just to echo what Dr. Sundram said, the law really does prioritise the views of the donor, but as Radha has just said, you know, donation is a situation that arises with the family. They're dealing with grief, so that has to be taken into account as well. But the law does definitely prioritise the views. When you sign in on the register, that's you authorised donation.
Thanks, Fern. Right, final question to Kiran, who is also one of our peer educators down south.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for a great webinar. It was just actually out of curiosity with regards to Cam. So her mentioning that she's come across members within her own family who are, sorry, I'm not going to start my video, who are quite, you know, obviously Gursikh family, practice Sikhism. I'm wondering what are the reasons, the conflicts that come there? Is it like similar things which keep on coming up? And unfortunately, your cousin says she still struggles with the decision now. I'm curious as to what their reasons are, if you don't mind sharing.
No, yeah, that's fine. So your question was in terms of how in a Gursikh family there's still conflict in it?
Yes. Yeah.
So my chachi was Amritdhari, so she was Gursikh. My uncle, my chacha isn't, and my cousins aren't. And I think again, these things, obviously we talk about CQ, we talk about Seva, and we talk about Simran and the 3 principles, but we don't talk about in depth what they really mean. And sometimes I think the teachings and the understanding aren't there. So I think that's why my cousins struggled with that. They didn't understand, because to them, they didn't realize that, from the teachings that it tells us that this body is only a vessel and things like that, and is not really left with anything. In their head, they thought the way you come into the world is the way that you should be leaving. And they didn't really have that idea of, doing organ donation is also a seva. And I think that's where it came into. And in terms of my cousin, I think she struggles not more with the organ donation part now, but more just about the death of her mum, I think, because it was just sudden. I think it's more dealing with that. And I think with her talking about her mum's organ donations, I think it would just kind of, at the moment, it's still quite raw with her. Even though it's been 5-6 years, but she still does struggle with it.
Okay, yeah, and that's really interesting to know, because, yeah, like in my role as a peer educator as well with the Sikh faith, it's often all boils down to a lack of understanding and a lack of awareness. And often when they are educated and empowered with that information, that they're actually more willing to do that. But I've found obviously that the obstacles with especially the older generation as well. And interesting, again, for your cousin who's struggling, would be so good for her to hear Bobby's story about the positivity that's passed on. And, I don't know if she's able to kind of connect with people who have been impacted by her mother's organs, that could really help in her healing.
Yeah,
potentially.
And I think that's what you touched on. It's the lack of knowledge, understanding, and I think the big part is the lack of communication within families or talking about this issue. People do tend not to talk about death in families. We talk about everything else. We don't talk about death or what our wishes are, what we want to do, and what happens, even though we know ultimately that's going to happen to all of us.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think there is a big, and it's great. I mean, obviously Kidney Research UK are doing, you guys are doing a wonderful job of raising awareness. And I'll be honest, I only really kind of last month when I came on the webinar, I realized the really impact in terms of the figures and things like that of how much of a need there is, especially in the South Asian community, for people to be organ donated, and to have those conversations, get people on board. Even though Auntie's been trying for years.
Yeah. Well, we're getting you there. You've come onto a webinar. Watch out, Cam. So yeah, Cam and Kieran, thank you so much for just basically illuminating there sort of some of the issues on grassroots level. So on that note, I know you're probably all wanting to get some dinner or whatever, or have the rest of your evening. I just want to pass over to Trishna Singh, OBE founder and director of Sikh Sanjog in Edinburgh, for some closing remarks.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you to Neerja and Bushra for organising this. It's been really excellent and very, very inspiring, and listening to everybody's stories has been really heartwarming. And they're also very brave to actually be speaking in public, because like Cam and Karen have said, our community, our people, they don't want to talk about it. If you mention death, they think you're courting death. So they don't want to talk about, they don't want to talk about the illnesses. People have so many different illnesses, and the same as the Western community. Cancer is so high, people have terminal cancer, the illnesses are there, and people have so much time to think about these things, but they will not discuss or talk about anything. And so the whole webinar has been brilliant, but I just have one suggestion that I know, that keeping people together for such a long time to listen to something is quite, that you really have to have an interest in it. But to get the message out to the communities, I think short versions would be so much helpful, to give them out, to have one story and a discussion with it, so that people can understand about the impact that it's having, because nobody knows if they might need a kidney or they might need another organ from somebody else. So they will understand that bit, that my loved one's in hospital and they need, if they get a kidney, it will save their life. But they don't ever think about giving their own, because they might be saving someone's life. And although there's many, many educated people around and everything, but this, at the level of grassroots community, is still very much a no-go area. Don't talk about it until it actually affects the families. So I'd just like to thank everybody so much. It's been really, really powerful, and thank you for all your hard work and your honesty. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Trishna, for your support, co-hosting this very important event with us, and to your colleague Jasbir Singh as well. And we couldn't do it without your support, your encouragement, and your love. We really appreciate it. So just a reminder then, we're not doing too badly for Indian Standard Time, I think. Just to say thank you very much for attending, and thank you to our fantastic, esteemed and expert speakers, to our co-hosts again, including Kamaljeet Kaur from the Central Gurdwara Singh Sabha, our fantastic funder Scottish Government, and you will be able to receive a recording of the webinar, which will be made available online very soon. Thank you so much, and just remains for me to say good night. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
We can help you.
Thanks. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.